stronger. There is no fixing this. There is no mending the bridge. This is war. And I'm going to do my best to damage their reputations because they deserve it.
So you're admitting to being openly hostile. So
100%. Same way they are to me.
So what expectation can you have in terms of discourse? Are you just sealing the deal now that, hey, I'm not going to have conversations with any of these people?
Welcome to the N1 Experience, brought to you by N1 Education, the leader in fitness education.
Today I'm speaking with Victor Black, and what sparked this conversation is Victor has put out some content kind of suggesting that he's being censored or not allowed to speak, or that there's we'll say some sort of conspiracy from the scientific community to not give him a voice, etc. And that's something I wanted to open up and dig a little bit deeper in, because I'm very anti-censorship, but at the same time, I also understand that somebody else's audience or time is not something that you're entitled to. So what exactly is going on here with this, like, not allowed to speak? Because, clearly, if you're on these platforms, you have a voice, you can build that audience as much as you want, speak to whoever you want. It doesn't mean that somebody has to engage in that conversation with you or let you onto their platforms with their audiences, etc. Because it can be somewhat misleading when somebody says, oh, these people are censoring me, etc. So I wanted to see if I could get that cleared up as much as possible. So the goal here was really to let Victor speak on that primarily. And then, of course, we're going to get into a whole bunch of other things. But I think that's important in understanding, okay, the right to refute or rebuttal, etc. If I disagree with somebody, I have the right to post my disagreement on my page to my audience, or on all of these platforms. I don't necessarily have the right to call somebody else into a debate, etc. I do believe that we should be more open to discourse, and that especially if we're making bold claims, etc., that we actually we encourage more discourse on these things. But I also do believe that you can't just open the floor and that anybody that disagrees with you gets to occupy your time and your space. So I think the correct way, or the best way to go about trying to get a debate with somebody, is to create the desire for that to occur, either from the person that you want to debate or from people, like a mutual audience, right? So if I speak in opposition on a topic and enough people are really interested in wanting to hear both sides of this in the same place, that creates pressure for that debate and that discourse to happen, even if the other person may not have seen or been motivated to do it before. Maybe that eventually motivates that discourse to happen, right? But some people simply don't want to engage in debate. I personally don't agree with that, but I also accept that it's your right to not debate. So balancing, that's a challenge. Part of that is going to be what we're talking about here. Because this is a long conversation with some kind of very long talking segments, I want to just touch on a couple things here that maybe I didn't respond to because there were long segments and multiple things to respond to. There's this kind of element of, is there a conspiracy to not solve the questions of training so that we can have a better opportunity to market a whole bunch of stuff? Because if the question isn't answered, then we can make up the answers. And I just don't think that's the case. What I think is the case, if anything, the conspiracy is that there is an answer, right? And there isn't one answer. And I think really what we have is we have a complex problem with multiple variables, individual variants, which means there's an enormous amount of questions to answer and sometimes multiple answers to those questions, which means that when it comes to offering services for fitness, nutrition, etc., that there's going to be a lot of ways that you can help people. There's going to be different models, there's going to be different methods, etc. And there's simply also just going to be just different environments for people to do that in. So I don't think that there is any motivation to not find out more information or to get more data and evidence so that we can focus more on the business model. I think that if anything, there's so many opportunities in terms of leveraging branding, working with niches, etc., that there's no pressures, there's no negative pressure there. The last thing that I wanted to just touch on really quick before we get into the episode is the comments of everybody's doing the same thing, or everybody did the same thing for X amount of years, etc., and put that in the context of whether that statement is true or not. And this is the reason that I don't spend a lot of time trying to push back and forth on that after I made one point on it, is that really it just depends on where you draw the line. If you want to say that, yeah, bodybuilders have been doing the same thing for 30 years, and by the same thing, you mean they've been lifting and eating protein, yeah, that's true. But as soon as we start adding more context and more nuance, then it becomes incorrect to say everybody's been doing the same thing. So really it just depends on how much you simplify or reduce what people are doing. If you pull all the nuance and context, eventually everybody's doing the same thing. As you layer on context and nuance, that's where the differentiation occurs. So for the sake of the conversation here, that was said a lot of times, and normally I would have interjected more, but I understood where Victor was coming from. So even though my line is different than his, that didn't seem to be a useful kind of debate to have in this conversation. That's probably a whole separate conversation on itself. So I just wanted to layer that context in there as well. And hopefully you guys enjoy the episode. And if you have disagreements or challenges or whatever, make sure you guys throw those in the comments. This was me just saying, hey, I just want to see what happens if I let this guy talk. And we agreed on a lot of things. I disagreed on some things or whatnot, and you guys can see that. So if you agree or disagree on those things, let us know. If you want to see me go like deeper down on any of these little topics or more nuanced and contextual on any of them, because that could have happened in a variety of time, let me know which one of those are. So without further ado, enjoy the episode.
I cannot state strongly enough how much I respect you giving me the opportunity to come and speak on your platform. I said before the call, I'm very excited about today's call because I have been desperately trying to be the voice of opposition for many years. And there is a deliberate and intentional opposition of counter voices in the science-based educational community. They literally deliberately suppress voices like mine. So first things first, thank you. World of respect. I absolutely cannot overstate how much I respect you allowing me to come and speak. Thank you, buddy. So some of the people that are listening will know who I am. My audience obviously know who I am. My audience know who you are, but there's going to be a lot of people that hear this that will probably hear me speaking for the first time because of this suppression. So I am first and foremost an evidence-based educator. That's how I identify myself, yeah? I know your audience understand this, but if you don't mind, what I would like to explain is what evidence-based means, because I think we're starting to lose the understanding.
That was actually going to be one of my first questions is how do you define evidence-based practice?
Cool. So going to medical school and becoming a doctor doesn't make you evidence-based. It's also completely possible that you can have a postgraduate degree and not be evidence-based. If people don't understand this, that you can hold the title of PhD and not be evidence-based. Yeah. Let me explain what I mean by that. Evidence-based is a set of practices and principles that really pulled out of medical practice. What we do is we combine what we learn from the clinical literature with clinical experience. Now, in a practical real-world setting, what that means is, well, what does the sports science literature and clinical literature say? And then what does 50 years of bros in the gym, busting a nut tell us? And it's where those two bodies of information meet, that we begin to talk about evidence-based. And that's one of the big frustrations of mine, and that is someone that's been doing this for 50 years, I'm 43 years into this, that knowledge that he's acquired, if he's a good observational student, holds every bit as much weight in this conversation as holding a PhD. Yeah, observation and anecdote is far more important than the science-based community wishes to lean into. Let me give you a simple example, practically. I understand that performance-enhancing drugs are not your domain, and I don't want to drill into performance-enhancing drugs. It's just a high-level conceptual discussion. If you were to go looking in the clinical literature today for a use case for the application of recombinant human growth hormone or insulin, you won't find it. In fact, what you'll find is a whole bunch of data that says it doesn't do anything. Right? So if you pulled out, growth hormone is one of the most studied drugs in all of pharmacology. They are testosterone, insulin, growth hormone. There's thousands of studies on these drugs. Yeah. And there's only 2 that suggest it's an anabolic hormone. So if you were to approach this from a point of averages, you would say, why the fuck are you messing around with growth hormone? It makes no sense. If you just looked at the literature, and this is the irony, so many people with academic qualifications over the years have literally made that statement. Why are you guys messing around with it? It doesn't work, and they start holding up studies. And they're 100% correct. But the paradox of that is every man since Dorian Yates has been using as much growth hormone as he can afford. There's something missing in that conversation. Either the clinical evidence is wrong or the bros are wrong. Now, what I would argue is, well, yeah, go ahead. You want to interject? Yeah.
Yeah. So to build off of this conversation when we're talking about the research on insulin and growth hormone, I did see you directly post 2 studies on insulin and protein synthesis. And your point was that they were contradictory. And my question is, did you read both of those studies in full? Because to me, they weren't contradictory at all. The title of one was somewhat contradictory because it said that basically it was, I believe the title was, is that it was not or did not enhance protein synthesis when used systematically. And that systematic use case that they use was specifically in hypoaminoacidemia, meaning that basically in the absence of amino acids, in that specific instance, the insulin was not able to increase protein synthesis. However, in the presence of amino acids, it was. So if you only take that title, then it seems like, oh, insulin doesn't do this. But that's in that one specific use case. And in that paper, they do actually show that when the amino acids are present, then it does induce. So both of those studies both said both of those facts, both of the systematic review paper and then that following paper in 2024 also went on both of those 2 points. And I think that we could probably agree that if you didn't eat and you only took insulin, that you're not going to build a lot of muscle.
I would go one step further than that. I think people inherently, this is the frustration that I have. When I say things, people like you and your audience are going to go, we all agree, we're all on the same page. Let me make a statement about reading studies. Yeah. The biggest mistake that we have on reading studies today is it's very easy to read the wrong study. Yeah. It's also very easy to make the wrong takeaways from the study. Yeah. I would argue before you speak, you really have to consider, what does the entire body of evidence say? Now, when it comes to drugs like insulin and growth hormone and testosterone, the depth of that literature is so vast that no one man could sit down and read everything that you need to read and be a coach. It's not possible. Yeah.
Maybe soon with AI.
Absolutely, 100%. This is one of the most exciting breakouts in our world, is going to be what AI brings to the table here, because of the speed that it allows us to understand data. But if we set that aside and say that's a hypothetical tomorrow, the realities today is this, and that is, if all you did was read every study that's ever been done on just one drug, testosterone, you would not finish it in a lifetime. It's just too much reading. And so what you end up having to do is say, look, when you have a conversation as well, what does the body of evidence say? Yeah, the body of evidence is a difficult thing, because most of the literature on growth hormone says, why would bodybuilders use it? That's what it says. Yeah. Most of the literature on insulin doesn't point to it being an agent through which exogenous application bodybuilders would get leverage. It's not what it says. So the point I'm making is simply this: you have to be incredibly careful with the takeaways you make from the clinical literature. Everybody knows this. I'm not saying anything new. I mean, hello, we say this week in and week out on podcasts like this. Yeah. The challenge is, of course, is that people want to associate bodybuilders' behaviors with what's in the clinical literature. And there aren't very many studies on bodybuilders. There really aren't. Now, we could talk about naturals, okay, and say, look, there's more interesting literature on naturals than enhanced. I have no problem with that. That's true, yeah. But when you actually said, look, if I sat down and went looking for quality studies on the enhanced, to guide on this, there really isn't very much literature at all.
So my question I would ask for you is, do you think that there's a conflict between what we have in the published research and what we see anecdotally in bodybuilding? Or is it simply that in the research, we just don't cover the context because we're not looking at the dosages and we're not looking at the same bodies,
We're
et cetera?
trying to
Because I
read.
see that more as the case, right? Because there are a few instances where they look at very high levels of insulin compartmentalized to a limb or something like that. And
Sure.
they do see like some of these very anabolic effects like that. Okay. But they're, because of research ethics and whatnot, they're likely not going to give normal people bodybuilding type protocols for in the same way there. But we do have some isolated formats showing that, oh, okay, there is some of this supported there. But especially in the case of growth hormone, there definitely isn't the context of those type of dosage and use cases, and definitely also not in that population. And I think that a lot of it, when it comes down to the research and then application in strength and conditioning or bodybuilding, is not so much that it's that the research disagrees with the bodybuilding. It's just that, hey, you're looking at manuals with it, or for like two different vehicles. They're not that it's not that they're the same vehicle and two different sets of instructions. It's that it's not the same context. And most people try and take a soundbite and then apply it out of context because that's popular or good for marketing. But I don't see a strong case of, hey, the research says this and bodybuilding says this exact opposite thing, unless we pull apart that context. Then there's tons of conflict. That's the way I view it.
Here lies the challenge. I would argue within that framework, understanding that framework, that 50 years of observation is critical. You have to have someone sitting at the table who's the voice of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether they have academic credentials or not, someone has to sit at the table who is a practitioner.
Well, observational evidence and anecdotal evidence are still evidence. And in the absence of randomized controlled trials, et cetera, they are all of the evidence.
Correct. Here's the problem. Whether you disagree with me or not is a moot point. It is my opinion, because there's a difference between what is fact and what is opinion. It is my opinion that there is still today a massive divide, a massive disconnect between elite bodybuilders and coaches and the science-based community. We are not.
I would agree
united.
there.
Yeah,
I would agree in terms that the communities are divided. Yeah.
And the great question remains, so we've been at this for 15 years. I think it's fair to say we've been having a crack for 15 years. Why, after 15 years, does such a gap still exist? And I'm proposing one of the reasons it still exists is the arrogance of the academics. They don't respect voices like mine. I come to the table, I said before, I don't even have a personal trainer certificate, but I've been at this 43 years. I'm a warfare engineer for the military. I have an engineer's mind. Yeah. So I have the capacity to read studies and I understand the evidence, but because I don't study this discipline, right, because I don't have a postgraduate degree, I'm dismissed as not a voice worthy of sitting at the table. Yeah. The one thing this tribe needs more than anything else is what I have always referred to as a council of elders, like a group of 10 guys, each sitting at the table, bringing something different to the table, and we can dig into these conversations and listen respectfully to everybody's different points of view and opinion. Yeah, I see absolutely no reason why that's not possible beyond the fact that the academics don't want people like myself to speak, and this is where we get into this conversation of deliberate and intentional suppression of any opposition to what someone's saying. So let me just dive into the point. I didn't come here to talk about PEDs. I came to talk about evidence. So let's talk about that. I'm an evidence-based educator. I have had, if you just use the metric of uptake and adoption of ideas, yeah, I'm arguably the most successful evidence-based educator in bodybuilding. Why? Because the most number of people have changed their behaviors because of what I have taught them. Now, I completely agree. I don't have the brand or the following that represents that. And there's a reason behind that. And that's this suppression that we talk about. So people listen to me that are influential, and then they, leverage my education but wish to bypass me. And the reason they wish to bypass me is they agree with what I'm saying about performance enhancing drugs, but they disagree with what I'm saying about training on nutrition. So they find someone that is teaching my models that is more palatable to them, doesn't disagree with them, other things, and they will promote them over me. A simple example is Renaissance Periodization is one of the most influential organizations in this industry. No one can doubt that. Been massively successful. Jared Feather uses my PED models, we refer to them as black models, but promotes one of my students, right, as the person that taught them to him. Why does he do that? Because he doesn't want people to know who I am. This is outrageous.
Now, have you worked with Jared himself, like at all personally?
No, but you understand. Yeah, you understand.
I'm just asking.
I understand. I'm not defensive, sorry if I'm speaking. I'm just, to be honest with you, I'm passionate, and this is a fabulous opportunity, as I said. So, if you think about it this way, so there's a guy called Joe Jeffrey. Do you know who Joe is? Doesn't matter if you do or not.
I do not.
Okay. He's a PED educator of sorts. Joe was making the traditional bro style content for a long time. I pulled him aside and taught him for free for a year how PEDs really work. And now he's gone off to replicate that model elsewhere in the world. And if he teaches someone like like Jared Feather, that's great. But ultimately, that's still my models, still my teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. I empathize with you. Just want to let you know that we're on common ground, and that, I mean, I'm in a different field than you are. We teach biomechanics and stuff like that. But I mean, literally exercises that we have done have been like named after other people and things like that. And I used to be very like, it used to frustrate me a lot. And then at a certain point, you just kind of cave to the point that it's okay. Yes, if I put this out here, people are going to take and they're going to disseminate everything that I do. It's just it. And so the only way for me to combat that is actually to like try and promote it myself. So that, because are you from like where are you from originally?
I'm Australian by birth, but I've lived in Thailand for over
right?
20 years. Yeah.
Okay. So I use this as like the Kleenex principle. So in the US, we have facial tissues that you blow your nose in, right? And they're just tissues. But it's a norm for people to call them Kleenex, and Kleenex is a brand, right? And that's just because Kleenex did the best job of marketing, and therefore now Kleenex is synonymous with that thing. And so basically what I've learned over time is like the only way to win this war of trying to protect your IP is you have to make it synonymous with you. You have to be the largest voice and the biggest promoter. Morally, I wish that wasn't the case, but in reality, I don't see any other way given the tools and the laws and the stuff that we have now.
I just want to interrupt you there. This is the challenge, is when I sit down with someone like yourself, we don't disagree on anything. We're not going to disagree on anything. The disconnect comes in the execution. So when I say to you things like this, so you have to guys need to understand this today is not a game of knowledge, it's a game of marketing. Yeah. And guys like Dr. Mike Israel are very successful because they are very marketing savvy. And there are other guys that are very intelligent and know a lot about what they're doing, but don't get the same market penetration because they don't have the same marketing skills. The first takeaway from that is coaches need to understand that this is first and foremost a business of marketing, not of knowledge. There are lots of guys that are very capable, very competent, have very interesting things to say, and no one knows who they are because they're not inherently good at marketing. Yeah. So the first takeaway from this conversation is people need to start to accept that this idea that, like, if you have interesting and unique and novel ideas and you put them on the table and defend them robustly and no one can seem to refute them, that you'll be successful, is just a lie, right? The great likelihood is people will come along that are better at marketing, that you will snatch those ideas up and leverage them into a payday, right? This is just how this business works. Yeah?
You can either be an innovator or a replicator in today's market. And unfortunately, we have switched to a world where it is much more successful for your business to be a replicator than an innovator versus 30, 40 years ago, being an innovator was much more fruitful.
When I was growing up, it was the man with the idea that got paid. There was an ethics model that says, look, that guy needs to get the hat tip. It's his intellectual property,
Yep.
right? We now live in a world where people and coaches need to understand this. You can be the smartest coach in your city, right? But the guy who's next to you, who doesn't know half of what you do, but is better at social media marketing, will outstrip you every time. This game has shifted from knowledge to marketing. It has. That's the first takeaway from this conversation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The second takeaway is this: if you're a scientist and you start selling something, and I use the example of Hanson, right? It's very successful. You can't take anything away from his success in the marketplace. But at the end of the day, his message is that he is bringing to the market a new evidence-based bodybuilding training model. Now, he has every right to do that. He can sell whatever the hell he likes. Like, I didn't have a problem at all with that. But if you're a scientist and you're selling something, you're just a salesman. You don't bring credentials with you with a product that are just given. The moment you pick up the salesman's hat, you're just a salesman. Now, what that means is that he can sell anything he wants, but he has an obligation to submit like a claim to peer review. For 10 years, I held an open microphone. Anyone that wanted to step up and refute any claim I have ever made in 10 years has that right. Yeah. And in 10 years, no PhD, no doctor, no coach, no athlete, no man in the world ever one time was able to refute any single claim I've ever made. That is the most remarkable track record in the history of science. 10 years undefeated. Yeah. And yet, Menno Hanson, who's selling a product, refuses to let me speak. He has an obligation to step up to the microphone and say, I'm proposing a new training model. These are the proposed benefits of it. And peers like myself should be entitled to pull that apart and let's have that conversation. Yeah. And the fact that we're not allowed to is, I mean, I know this is a harsh word, but that's a key tenet of science, that you submit your claims to peer review. It's a key tenet. Now, what does peer review mean? And this is the pushback. Because I don't have a PhD, because I don't have academic credentials, I'm not allowed within the academic circle jerk. Now, whether you guys understand it or not, there are 4 big circle jerks in bodybuilding. There's one that revolves around Dave Palumbo. Do you know who Dave Palumbo is?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So there's a circle jerk that revolves around him. They're all self-supporting guys that are all pandering to each other, and they're all got their nose in the trough. Yeah. They say the most outrageous things constantly, but they get away with it because there's a cluster of men that support them around that. There's another circle jerk around a guy called Derek Cole called More Plates, More Dates. He has a circle of people that reinforce his ideas and beliefs. And there's another circle around a guy called Fuad Abiad. And then there's an academic circle jerk. These circles never cross over. They never cross over. You don't see people from one circle interacting with the other circle. And there is an academic circle. I'm not allowed to speak at the academic table because I'm not a credentialed academic. You understand? That's not how science works. How science works is you say, here's an evidence-based guy who in 10 years held an open microphone and no one could refute a single line item he said. What an amazing track record. Let's let Victor speak. What do you think, Victor? But they're so insecure and the game is built on such a pathetic house of cards. I'm not even allowed to talk.
So I want to get into this. This is actually part of my first thing. So when you say you're not allowed to talk, what do you mean? Because I mean, you're on this platform, but you have access to the same platforms, all the social medias and whatnot that everybody else does. So do you think that if somebody builds an audience, that you are entitled to that audience rather than having to build the audience yourself?
Not on necessarily on their platform. I understand that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point I have to have the right of rebuttal. Yeah. Now,
but how do you not? I guess
I'll give you a simple example. I specifically asked you if we could set up a debate with Dr. Milo Wolf. Mm-hmm. And you said, that's not going to happen. He won't do it. That's outrageous. He doesn't get the right to go on his social media platforms and start ranting about social media scientists and how bad they are. And he's not one of the bad guys, right? And then refuse to let me have 30 minutes of your time, Milo. Right? You yourself said he won't even come on your show.
Yeah.
Like, how is that a scientist? That's a joke.
So, from a principle perspective, I believe that the more discourse, the better. Absolutely.
Of
Like
course,
I
of
believe,
course.
and I think that the stronger the opinions that you're putting out, etc., and if you're saying they are evidence based, that you should be more willing to have conversations about that. If you're just throwing out your opinions out there, if you're just like, hey, I like this, or these are my preferences, you shouldn't have to deal with everybody trying to debate you on those things. But if you're
100%.
saying things are evidence based or science based, or if it's proven, whatever, in any way, like to me, that is inviting discourse on those things, and you should participate in that. That being said, I also believe that you're not entitled to anybody else's time. So, as much as I disagree with Milo choosing not to debate certain people, myself included, that I also agree that, hey, I don't have the right to 30 minutes of his time. That's just
Okay.
not. But I do have the ability to get on here and like voice my opinion on my own platforms and build that reach. I wouldn't say that. I don't think it's fair for you to say that you don't have the right to do it. You could say that, hey, you feel like these people should be giving you those opportunities if they're making those claims. But my question would be, have you made the effort to, like, how much effort have you made to create a counter, like a movement or following of a counter argument? Because typically what tends to happen is if somebody's, okay, this person has an opposing view to you, but if there's no traction behind it, there's no relevance. And so therefore that's not worth the time. But all of a sudden, when like traction and enough people are like, hey, this other guy has this opinion and more people are now interested in that discussion, that's what eventually forces those conversations to happen,
I
right?
couldn't agree with you more. Let me just interject. The point you're asking is completely valid. I agree with you. But here's the counter to that, and that is, do you acknowledge that there seems to be this underground welling of anti-science sentiment going on? People are starting to question the validity of evidence-based practice and science-based training, and it seems to be gaining momentum. Do you agree that's observationally true?
I believe that it's more anti-scientist than anti-science. I believe there is a very small sentiment that is anti-science, and a lot of that is just people that are just like, "Hey, I just want things to be really kept really simple, and I don't want to." But for I think most people, and keep in mind that my perception is based off of my algorithm and the people that I see in the circles that I'm in, right? Whatever circle jerk that I live in. But I would say most people, it's not that they actually are frustrated with the science themselves, but it's the communicators and the content creators and some of the like the bickering back and forth on like little details that like maybe don't matter, which I believe, I mean, I love discourse, so it's like, hey, I don't have a problem with getting into the minutia, right? I don't think that means that okay, just because it's minutia, we can't talk about it. I think it's like, hey, if it's interesting, if it's not interesting, then don't watch it, right? If you don't want to talk about some little nuance of training or whatever, it's cool that like, nobody's like forcing you to watch the videos or whatnot. But if you're trying to say, hey, this tiny little detail is the most important thing and it's going to magically train your training, well, then you're making false claims on that level of nuance. So I would agree that there is definitely a lot of pushback on science-based content on social media, but I don't think, at least in the fitness industry, that it's really, oh, science itself is garbage. I think it's more so the content creators and the communication right now. And I do believe that a lot of that has to do, we'll say it's probably a big chunk of that has to do with the personalities involved
Mm-hmm.
too. So I think it's more of a people problem. And
Can I
prior to
extend,
this, go ahead.
go ahead, sir. Let me extend that though. That's what I meant. So let's go back to my research. I'm an evidence-based educator. I passionately believe in evidence-based education. It's the scientists that are a problem. It's the social media scientists that are the problem, not science. It's
Yeah.
the individuals that hold sway in this tribe because they're not scientists. They're internet marketers masquerading as scientists. And here's the point, and that is there is an underground movement welling up. And here's the shocker. I'm the man behind it. So when you said about what are you building a movement, that's my movement. Yeah. The reason I'm such a thorn in the side to all these people, the reason they won't even speak my name is because they know how dangerous I am. Yeah. So the challenge is though this, and that is when I set out to teach people about evidence-based performance-enhancing drug education, my goal, quite bluntly, was this: to try to reach 1% of the PED user community. Because I recognize that the overwhelming majority of people are not interested in harm reduction, which is my core message. Yeah, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying here's you're not going to get bigger if you do it my way. You're not going to be better if you do it my way. You're simply going to lower risk. Yeah. So I understand that the overwhelming majority of enhanced bodybuilders are not interested in that message. You have to understand that. Yeah. There's only a very small percentage of people that are interested in that message. I set myself the ambitious target of reaching 1%, right? That's 100,000 men. And my goal was to sell them an educational content package right up front so people understand I'm selling an educational content package. The cost's $100. So 100,000 men by $100 is $10 million. And I'll take my $10 million and move on. Now, the reality is that when the audience that I potentially can reach is so small, I can never, push it back against men that have 2 million followers. Right?
Now,
I just don't have that reach. I can't push back against these guys, but I can explain how the circle jerk works. If there's 4 circle jerks, within each circle jerk, within the what I basically call the Mike Israetel circle jerk, there is a guy called Joe Jeffrey who teaches the black models, and he's the PED educator by default within that circle. Within the Fuad Abiad circle jerk, there's a guy called John Jewett. I don't know whether you know John Jewett. Do you know John? So John literally just ripped off my materials, didn't ask me whether he could use them. He just was a member of my materials. He took them and replicated them in his own paid content. So within that circle, there's a black model educator. And Derek More Place More Dates is a client, is a student of mine. He started in 2018. He knew nothing about PEDs, and I taught him about PEDs. He just happens to be a great marketer. Yeah. So this is the problem: is I taught Derek about performance-enhancing drugs. He happens to be. There's a couple of things here that you have to understand, but ultimately, this is a conversation about, do the thought leaders get the spotlight, or do the marketers? It's the marketers, right? Here's the challenge. You said I encouraged you when you said, I want to robustly challenge you on this claim of how much influence you've had on the marketplace. By all means, here's my question for Mike Israetel. He hasn't taught us anything new. There's no new discussion in bodybuilding, in the last 30 years. The only new discussion in bodybuilding in the last 30 years is harm reduction. Okay. So nothing that he goes on about 1,400 or 1,800 videos. It's just churn about the very same conversations we've all been having for the last 30 years. You understand that the volume intensity debate goes back to Mike Mentzer and Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know that, right? Yeah. It's been going on for 50 years. Why does it never end? The simple answer is the reason it never ends is the people that at the table speaking don't want it to end. They have a vested interest in keeping the conversation going, because it's through having the conversation that they get the attention that they monetize. You could put that conversation to bed in a Post-it note. It's not in the financial interest of anyone to have that conversation, because what it does is says, think about it. I'm going to switch thoughts for a moment. How is it possible that 100 intelligent men can be having the same conversation since Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mike Mentzer? We still haven't figured it out. How is that possible? It's only possible because it's not in our interest to figure it out. We need to keep the wheels of commerce moving forward. We need to keep churning and churning. I will give you the volume conversation. Do you mind if I give you the volume conversation in a Post-it note?
Yeah, I was going to say, you said you could do it in a Post-it note. Do it, and then I'll respond.
The average trainer, right, dating back 30 years, has approximately 1 hour a day to train 5 days a week. That's a reality. I'm not talking about the elites. I'm not saying there's a special room over there for guys chasing 1/100th of a second. I'm talking about the average person that the coach deals with on a daily basis. He is time poor today. Yeah. How much volume does he need to do? He needs to do that much. How many sets can you squeeze into an hour, 5 days a week? It's finite. These conversations about very low training volume, no one's ever trained like that seeking hypertrophic outcomes. We've not trained that way for a long time. We also know back in the 70s, guys used to train 4 hours a day. That's how we trained. Yeah. And so what happened was Arthur Jones came along and said, look, if this is ever going to become a mainstream thing, we can't have a 4-hour day training model. We need a 1-hour a day training model. And that's how HIT was born. That's the HIT conversation. How many years can you argue about how much training volume could fit into an hour? This is a silly conversation. If you said finite, infinite time, elite athletes, I have no problem. Let's go over here and have a sidebar discussion about what that might look like. I have no problem with that. But in the real world, this is a 10-minute conversation. You have an hour a day, 5 days a week. How far does this go?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's churn.
So I agree with the time poor instance, and that's most people's limitation. And I would say for the average trainer, it's probably less than 5 hours, right? I mean, unless you're exclusively training physique athletes, you might be working with substantially less. If you're a trainer that works with general population, you might be in the 2 and 3 hours if you're lucky on average. I think coming from corporate personal training, the
100%.
average training client trained less than 3 times per week. It was about 2.5 times per week. So he had basically on average 2.5 hours.
So I just want to interrupt you there because so if you were to say it's 3 hours a week, because you're 100% right, that's observationally true. How many sets can you do in 3 hours? And then the follow-on question is, I would argue, who you train with is more important than how you train.
Can you elaborate on that?
Picking the right training partner can be the difference between success or failure, right? I know that when people train with me, they train harder than they do when they're on their own. I know. Yeah. I watch them in their videos they make of themselves filming, and then they come and train with me, and you get another 10% just because they're in front of you, eyeballs on, right? Who you train with is potentially more critical than any metric of how you train. Yeah. Even where you train is more important. The right environment. I passionately believe in the idea of things like music and lighting and the environment, and these things matter more than how you train. And I would argue, once you start to distill this down as an engineer, because engineers solve problems, we don't waste time. Yeah. What happens, you go, okay, so we have a client who basically has 3 hours a week to train. I would like him training with someone that inspires him, because I know that will elicit the best in him. I don't want him, training with someone that drags him down. And I think from observation, he will do better if he's with the right guy. So now he only has an hour and a half a week focused on him and an hour and a half focused on his training. How complicated is this conversation? We're blowing this thing massively out of proportion because people need to keep talking 50 years later. It's not a complicated conversation. It's a 3 hours a week, divide that by half because I want him to have a training program. How much volume could you do in an hour and a half a week?
So let me ask you a question. So if we look at things on time scale, that drastically simplifies things because it's okay. My volume is now measured in time, but you can fill time a lot of different ways, right? You can rest long, you can rest short, you can superset, you can circuit, you can train closer to failure further. So when it comes down to training efficiency, and this is actually where I think that we have had a lot of evolution, and it's a combination of both practice and science that are contributing of, hey, there's a lot of ways to fill that hour. And that can help depending on the type of environment you train in, whether you train at a busy gym at 5 o'clock after work, or if you have free reign of a fully equipped gym versus if you're training at home. Like that, we have all these solutions in the way to solve those things. And in terms of how much volume can you fit in that hour? Well, it comes down to how you organize that training. And that's how much output you can get. And there will be some individual difference on how people tolerate rest versus intensity, et cetera, and stuff like that in terms of how you can get the most work out of them within that window of time. So I wouldn't go ahead.
Can I ask you a question? Do you believe that progressive overload is a key tenet of training programming?
I think yes, if you look at it on scale, if you look at it micro, if I train today and I train next week and I don't add 5 pounds, I don't immediately go to 0 gains. But over time, it is on scale, it for sure is going to be a component to maintain stimulus.
Cool. And do you believe that I'll back up. I would argue, rather than you, I would argue, yeah, after doing this for over 40 years, most clients that come through the door, right, the biggest problem is adherence.
Mhm.
Okay. Every client I meet struggles to stick to a food plan. It's like talking to obese people. They know what they need to do, they just can't fucking do it.
Mhm.
Right? It's like most people that are seeking hypertrophic outcomes. They come to me and I work with them and I go, I'm not joking. And I know this sounds very dismissive, but it's observationally true. They don't eat enough and they don't train hard enough.
Mhm.
Right? Because what happens is, as newbies, they go into the gym and just the sheer act of applying mechanical resistance, getting off the couch and doing something is enough of a stimulus to get moving. Yeah. And then my son's going through the process of first exposure to training. Like he's gone from like just moving the barbell to now he's got 15 kilograms on each side within 30 days. Everybody's initial response is very high. Like you get this, everyone knows the term newbie gains, but the reason is progressive overload is built into a new trainer's mindset. They know that the weight's going to go up. And then what happens is almost everyone gets a certain block of time into the experience and stalls. It's a universally true experience. Everyone gets in, everyone that turns up and does what they need to do gets a result up front. Everybody. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then eventually it slows and then stalls. And when I come along to unstick them, the answer is always the same. You're supposed to progressively overload and you don't. And then when they start doing it, they take off again. You're supposed to eat more food and they start off at recommended daily intake. And this is saying like simple things. I'm diverting the conversation. So if you have any questions, we'll come back. You understand that the bodybuilding nutrition model hasn't changed in 30 years. It looks like this. You start off at recommended daily intake of protein and caloric intake. And slowly over time, you need to titrate to the caloric substrate that is used by bodybuilders globally. That is approximately 4,500 to 5,500 calories a day and between 250 and 350 grams of protein a day. That hasn't changed in 50 years. You go and interview any of the elite bodybuilders, that's what they eat. Now, you can't just make a digital jump. You need to slowly titrate. And the number one reason that everybody stalls in practical reality is they don't eat enough food and they don't train hard enough. But they know that they need to eat more food and they know that they need to progress. And when you motivate them to do things, they start growing again. It's not the nuance of the training styles that holds people back. It's the fact that they're not adhering to the absolute fundamentals that cannot be argued. And then what I would argue is this. If you follow a very simple program, the average trainer is going to put on 10 pounds of tissue in the first year, 8 pounds, 5 pounds, 3 pounds. There is absolutely a diminishing response over time for naturals.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the point I'm making is like, you don't need to do anything terribly sophisticated to pick up those gains. They hand them to you on a paper plate just for turning up and just for doing what needs to be done. And the only people that don't get those gains given to them are the people that don't follow the most simple of the frameworks. You don't eat enough. You don't train hard enough. You're partying on the weekends. And you're like, these are very simple conversations. The problem, no one really argues with this. The problem is, but we want to have these more sophisticated conversations because we cannot all say the same thing. If you were the only coach in the world and you had access to everyone, you could easily tell that message. But the moment you realize you have 10,000 other people who are all in the game and all saying the same thing, it creates this environment that people are forced, in order to create a unique selling proposition, to start becoming more and more complicated, more and more nuanced. And what drives the nuance isn't outcome, it's a desire to brand yourself. And that's the nature of branding, to try and separate yourself from your 10,000 competitors.
So let me step back to where you said, oh, it's 5,000 calories, et cetera, or whatever, and ask you the question of, are we conflating the destination with the journey getting there? Meaning that you're saying like, well, that's what bodybuilders need to do. Or is it really that there's just this kind of correlation with that. Hey, if you put on enough tissue and you're training hard enough, eventually you get to the point where you have to be eating 4,500 to 5,000 calories. So basically, by the time you've reached success, those are the dietary requirements at that point.
All I'm suggesting is this. I am simply commenting on observation, and that is the starting point of great science. Observation, right? It's really interesting that pretty much every successful bodybuilder in the last 30 years uses exactly the same drug model. It's pretty interesting that every bodybuilder in the last 30 years uses the same caloric intake model. Now, what I'm suggesting is our starting point for recommending to clients is clean up your diet, get rid of all the shit, and follow a balanced diet at recommended daily intake. That's the start. That's step one, right? But there has to be, if you think about it, well, surely the recommendation is we have to move from here to here. You need to pay the anabolic toll, and observationally, 100,000 bodybuilders basically all start moving in that direction. Now, how quickly they move varies massively, but it's an observationally true thing. That's where they end up. That's the end point, right? So if this is the beginning point and that's the end point, the strategy has to be, over time, we gradually titrate towards that end point and observe for effect, and then make adjustments based on individual genetic response, right? Yeah. It's impossible to argue, because that's just the logical thing to do. Rather than digging into studies, why don't you just go, let me describe what I call the universal works model. This is the universal works model. Let's ask the world's 50,000 most successful bodybuilders what they do, right? And then average that. That has to be average. You have to take the mean, right? Because there are always going to be outliers, yeah? And that then becomes the recommendation for newbies that are seeking their outcome. Surely that makes sense to everyone. Why do we need to separate from that's because that's how we taught each other in the past. We stood on the shoulders of giants. We looked at what successful men before us were doing, and we emulated it.
Now, taking that approach, how is that much different than what we're looking at research? And we're saying, okay, on average, people respond to this type of training, this much volume, these macros, et cetera. Like, you're doing the same thing. I mean, granted, there's going to be population differences, right? And the controls are a little bit different and stuff like that. But I think the weak point in both of those cases is that if you are using the average, right? If you are using the mean, if you actually look at the bell curve of this, right? The majority of the people do not fall exactly under the mean. They follow slightly to the left and slightly to the right, and then more whatever, right? And so I think it's very tempting to want. My brand is N1.
Can I just interrupt? Because I do want to answer those two questions, and then we'll go back to what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. So the first point is, you have to understand, but bodybuilding is not a game of the mean. It's a reality that the elite, the talent, bubbles to the top. Right. I'm sure you know this. This is what I'm saying. I don't mean to sound condescending when I say this, but everybody knows this. When you walk into the gym and you see a monster in the room, that doesn't mean he knows any more than you or me. Just because he's big doesn't mean he knows shit, right? Yeah. I've seen the overwhelming majority of men that are physically impressive, that open their mouth and dirt falls out. I don't mean one or two. That's the norm.
So let me ask you a question. Does that pollute the mean?
Yes, and this is the whole point I'm getting at. And that is, we don't understand what bodybuilding really is. Bodybuilding is a case of, there's two rooms. There's a room for the contenders, and there's a room for the average man. And what takes place in those rooms are two different conversations. And we're trying to force everybody into the same room. It makes no sense, right? What we need to have is, we need to have a room, just like in athletics, where there are men that are chasing 1/100th of a second, and that matters, right? Now, what we talk to those men about is vastly different than what we talk to a recreational jogger about. They don't need to know the same things, and yet we want everyone to be. And the reason we want everyone to be in the same room is this: there's a finite number of contenders. There's 450 players in the NBA. There are 500 to 1,000 elite bodybuilders in the world. And this is, let's go back to the point I was making. What I proposed was a lifetime exposure model whereby 95% of men that are interested in enhancement practices follow what I refer to as a basal use model. It's low risk, sustainable practice for the next multi-decade time frame. They don't need to be blasting and cruising and taking high-risk drugs. And then there's a secondary room in which the contenders live, where they have to accept this as an extreme sport, and it comes with elevated risk profile, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that Joe Schmo gym rat needs to be taking risk with drugs is just, it's insane. You don't have what it takes, nor can you put the effort on the table to realize that thing. Why are you even in that fucking room? The problem is that room is so small that it doesn't sustain a large number of information providers. It's a tiny room. And this is what it comes to. All of this is about money. Because I don't think there's anyone that could agree that there are levels of conversation that you have with average people and with elite people. They're different conversations. Yeah. And the time and money that the elite can invest that are paid to train is remarkably different from our man that spends 3 hours a week training. Yeah, they're just different conversations. But we are compelled to push everyone into the same room because the number of people that need that detailed conversation is so small that it cannot support the number of content providers in the marketplace today. What should happen is we should build 2 rooms, and anyone that wants to go over to that room, by all means, yeah. But most people need to be in this room, and what we need to do is massively simplify these conversations. Let's just dumb them right down to the, dude, you've got 3 hours a day to train. How much talk we need to, how can we talk about volume 50 years later? It's ridiculous.
So I would say, actually, I think that the market has shifted more towards people advertising to the non-professional, because that's where the business is. That's where the clients are. Like the number of people that have, hey, I help stay-at-home moms or average whatever, or men at the state, like everybody's choosing this niche, but I would say the majority of the market now and the majority of the content is actually geared towards not that top 5 or 10%. It's geared towards the majority of the consumers. But one thing when it comes to...
Can I challenge that though? Let me challenge that, because this is part of the problem, and that is you have all these people wanting to develop new training models or new nutritional models, and I'm going like, well, if we're talking to the average person, what for? The question is this: does it work better? Because I'm a massive believer that is, if a proposed model is statistically significantly better, then it should displace what went before. It should, right? But if it's the same, if you don't elicit bigger, better, faster from a practice, it's just selling stuff to sell stuff. And this is my pushback to your community, and that is, you look at all these trainers, and this is just the truth. People get upset, but it's just true. Guys like Dr. Eric Helms and Menno Hanson and Steve Hall, they look no better than natural bodybuilders 100 years ago. They're not bigger or better in any dimension, so they're churning all this content, encouraging people to invest time and energy and money into education that, observation at least, doesn't produce a result. Because what happens is you have guys that train for 15 years as science-based naturals, and they look like that, and then you have some genetic outlier that comes along that just turns up and does stuff, and within 2 years he destroys them, right? And the point I'm making is, unless you can basically defend a model that says it is bigger, it is better, it's faster, I have no problem with you selling it, but drop the science tag, drop the PhD tag. You're just selling a fucking training program, right? Do you agree with me that in the science-based community, and I want you to nominate, who would you argue is the poster boy for bigger, better, faster because you use a scientific method? Who's the poster boy?
I mean, me personally, like, of the people that I respect in that industry, Eric Helms would probably be there. But, do you
agree, though, that he just looks, for 15 years of training, he looks very average? Now, that's not critical. Here's the loop. If you go into the gym and you see the biggest guy in the gym, you know that knowledge does not correlate to outcomes. You know that, right?
Yes.
And then when you flip the coin...
relatively, yeah.
Yeah. And then when you flip the, yeah, but I can clarify that if we come back. But then when you flip the coin and you say to scientists, yeah, but dude, the reason Eric looks the way he does is because knowledge doesn't correlate to outcomes. We all know that.
So
right?
the genetics thing is something I want to spend a good chunk of time on, and especially this. But I just want to step back on one thing before we. So when it comes to models, and if a model is better than the other, it should replace it. I think that our ability to make a universal model is folly. Like it doesn't. I don't think it exists. Are there certain principles that are going to apply, like at a higher probability on mass? Absolutely. But when you actually start getting down to the nuances of application and actually the problem solving that most people, need to have, right? Whether it's to help them with compliance or whatever it may be, that this is where different models work better for different people. And I think that's why there's just simplify it to nutrition, right? Like how much of a nutrition program is just whether it meets the preference that is going to be like, okay, that's a diet that I'm going to stick to, etc. Right. So does that mean that, yeah, right. So same thing for training, maybe like when it comes down to frequency, volume, effort, etc. Like all of these things are going to play into the experience, how consistent people are, how motivated they are to train, etc. Like a lot of models are basically like, if you're a coach, my thing is like, you're a problem solver for the client. That's what it is. That's what personal training is. Whatever problems they come in with, you're trying to overcome those problems to help them meet those basic principles. And that can look very different. And so you can apply a lot of different models and you can specialize.
I don't mean to interrupt you. The problem is we agree. We're saying the same thing. No one's disagreeing here. And this is what gets frustrating with the whole community is you're right. It's about problem solving and it's about personal preference, but understanding when I started the conversation, explaining what evidence-based means, you have what does the clinical literature say? What does 50 years of observation and anecdote say? And the third leg, the tripod of evidence-based is client preference.
Yeah,
right.
It's the end.
So it's built into evidence-based. Client preference built. I'll give you a simple answer about what I mean by framework. Today, the world suffers an obesity epidemic. That's not negotiable. We just do, right? Now, the reason that we suffer it is because people can't adhere to healthy nutritional practices. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they don't move enough. And there's all these people out there wanting to argue about some rare metabolic disease that I have no problem with a small room of people where we have specialists that live where there are those outliers. Those outliers exist. Yeah. But the reason the average American is obese is they eat poorly and they don't move enough. That's just the truth. That's a very simple model. So if you want to fix that, we need to find a way, and including evidence-based, that is within client preference. I agree with you, where we can get them to control caloric intake and we get them to move more. That's the framework. The framework for solving this obesity epidemic is a post-it note. Now, that doesn't mean that post-it note is the end of the conversation, but we're getting drawn into this conversation about obscure metabolic outcomes. And I'm going like, that's just not the reality of it. The problem is that selling the idea, everyone's looking for a pill. You know that. Everyone's thinking, oh, there's a magic pill out there that I can take. The latest, there's drugs that keep fads that keep coming and going. The reality is that 90% of the obesity epidemic is solved by a simple framework: control your calories and move more.
Yes. Right? But I would argue that there are a ton of, you could call them models, systems, whatever, of ways to control your calories.
Of course.
Right.
But at the end of the day, a calorie is a calorie. Agreed?
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that you're not right, but what I'm saying is, but how do you talk about that for 50 years? Well, like it's an afternoon conversation and it's over.
Well, it just depends on how far you want to take the conversation, because if there's essentially an infinite number of models and paths, well, then that conversation can go. It just depends on like, where do you stop that conversation? Well, if you reduce it to its most simple elements of, hey, eat less, move more, cool, you can end it there. But at that point, the conversation hasn't solved the problem for anybody, because everybody already knows that. And guess what? They're still eating too much and not moving enough, right? So when you take the conversation to the point where it's useful, then it ends up lasting longer and going in a lot different directions.
You're 100% right. This was saying we end up in this tumbleweed where we agree with each other. What I'm saying is the number one problem for people seeking hypertrophic outcome today, right? The number one reason is they don't eat enough food, right? And they don't train hard enough.
Yeah. And I
That's
would say
just
the last thing is that they just don't want to let the time elapse.
correct. And here it comes the problem, and this is what all I'm asking people to accept. If we were to create a series of hierarchical inputs, we start at the top. What's the most important input to success? It is unquestionably adherence over time.
Mhm.
There is no rebuttal. It's adherence over time, right? And then there's these things that you come down and specialist knowledge. I'm not saying I understand what the plan is. I'm going to go and wait X. I'm talking about this type of specialist knowledge that takes 50 years to get to the bottom of, right? Doesn't even make the top 10 list of discussion subjects. What I mean by that is, like I was saying before, who you train with is more important than the training program you use, provided the training program fulfills the fundamental criteria of training program that we have used successfully for the last 30 years. You have guys like Dr. Mike Israetel making claims that Ronnie Coleman would have had even bigger legs if he did lower squats. This is insanity. You know, guys, I don't know whether in 2017, let me tell you where all this conflict came from. In 2017, I debated Mike Israetel and I destroyed him. I completely destroyed him, but he suppressed the whole thing. I'll tell you what the debate was. He was going around making the claim that the evidence says, let me be very clear here. The evidence says that Dorian Yates would have been an even bigger bodybuilder than he was at 270 pounds if he did more volume. And my rebuttal to him was this: Mike, you are entitled to that opinion, but that's not what the evidence says. Right? That's not what anyone that thinks that the current body of clinical literature says that Dorian Yates, the 270-pound mass monster, would have been bigger if he did more volume, that's not science. Why does he make that claim? Because he has an agenda. He wants to sell his training programming. And basically, he wants to suppress my name because he doesn't want people to hear that type of argument. I'll ask you, do you think that's what the evidence says? Do you believe the evidence says that Dorian Yates would have been bigger if he did more volume?
Well, I just think there's an absence of evidence, period, to be able to make claims about the genetic outliers, period, especially by the time they have reached success of somebody like Dorian Yates. But when it comes
you could
to
have that opinion, but it's not evidence-based. Agreed?
So you could extrapolate that, okay, at this point in time, because this was 2017, and if I'm thinking of, okay, Mike Israetel's content in 2017, and volume was a very strong proponent of what they were putting, and that they were like looking at, okay, volume seems to be producing more results. And if you generalize that to a principle that should apply to everybody, then, and you include Dorian Yates in there, then you look at, okay, Dorian did a low set volume, higher intensity approach. Therefore, if we apply this principle, then more volume would be better.
Let me tell you why you're wrong. Let me tell you why you're wrong.
I'm not saying that's correct.
No,
right.
Okay, so if someone made that claim, let me explain why. And that is because this. If you
but
know
that's
our
not
history,
evidence-based.
No, it is evidence-based. I'll tell you why I'm evidence-based. Let me tell you what the evidence actually says. In the 1970s, we used to do 60 or 70 sets per body part. We used to spend 4 hours a day in the gym, right? And as we lowered volume, we got bigger and bigger. The evidence says exactly the opposite, but people mistake observation and clinical literature, and they think that that's not observation. You think about it. You understand this. Arnold Schwarzenegger's era, we did high volume training. We did, right? And in Dorian Yates' era, we lowered the volume and there was a correlation. We got bigger. How could you make some connection that, well, if we went back to higher volume, maybe we'd get bigger again? This is insanity. Who makes that kind of mental connection between we did this and we saw this, but it's not true?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you say, oh, okay, we were doing 40, 70 sets and then we dropped it down, right? Okay. If you say, hey, more sets would make you grow more, obviously, if you extend that to infinity, then there's going to be that's not going to be true. I think I'm just trying to put myself to strongman or steelman Mike's position in that I don't think that he would have just been like, oh, Dorian would have been bigger just because well, here's what I think. I think he genuinely believed, because he believes in the research that he was looking at, that principle would have applied to Dorian.
Sure.
That is my that now I don't agree with that, and we can get into that when we talk about the genetics thing, right? And same thing with the Ronnie Coleman thing. But I think that there are people that they're looking at the research, and because they value it so much, they then apply those principles out of context, is what I
Right.
would assume there is in that instance. I don't think it's malicious per se. I think it's just a lack of, we'll say, thought of the reality of that context
We,
and everything
we,
that goes into it.
we could disagree on that. The reason I'm not saying it's malicious, I'm saying it's constrained by how much revenue do you think Renaissance periodization turn over a year? This is a multi-million-dollar enterprise, right?
Yes, but
They,
I don't think it's contingent on people having to buy into volume. I think and I think they have changed their pitch over time. Like,
yeah,
and it's
because of
happening
me.
right now with
Because of me. I
full
drove
range of
that
motion.
change. I
So,
drove that change. My relentless persecution of Israel made him change his position. So he understood what I was saying correct, but rather than turn to me and say, "Hey, Victor, showed me a thing or two, and he's right," he now needs to suppress my voice, right? Because he doesn't want people to hear what I'm saying.
yeah. I didn't.
Anyway,
I couldn't find that debate. So I wanted to. I looked
I
for it.
will, I will send you a link. Yeah, I will send you a link.
Okay, cool. So let's jump into the genetics discussion. The whole, did you make Ronnie Coleman bigger, et cetera, whatever. So the thing that you sent me, one of the things is that there's limits to human performance and there's nowhere to go from here. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit, and then I'll chip in.
I would argue that the greatest risk to our health as bodybuilders is not the drugs we use, but sheer mass that we carry around. Yeah. It's walking around at 300 pounds that kills men. Okay. So people want to blame the drugs. It's not the drugs. So my model, basically, I have certain key tenets. One of my models is we only use approved for human use drugs that are in lifetime human clinical use. So it becomes a conversation then not about can we use these drugs or can we use them for multi-decade timeframes. It comes as a conversation about the dose is the poison. Okay. Now, understanding that genetic outliers being genetic outliers are just hyper responders to stimulus. It's just reality. Yeah. They can go into the gym and do exactly what you and I do, and they get a different response. Yeah. And so what happens is you have situations where at 300 pounds, what I would argue is there's nowhere to go. All you're going to do is kill men. Like, why do they need to be bigger than 300 pounds? Why? Like, surely there's a point where you go, that's big enough, because any more than that, you're just risking their lives. Like, I would argue we should actually, one of the lessons that I teach elite athletes is the number one harm reduction strategy that you can elicit as a professional athlete is to compete in a weight class. Because then you get to a certain threshold, let's argument, say 212 pounds, or you compete in classic physique and there's a weight cap. It's the pursuit of mass that ultimately brings us undone. So when you have individuals the size of Ronnie Coleman, who in their right mind is suggesting that we need to drive men to get bigger than this?
Yeah. The subjectiveness of bodybuilding, what is the desired for winning, has went through several changes, right? Because when Dorian was winning, and then when Ronnie, mass became a thing. And then sometime around the Phil Heath, Jay Cutler competition era, all of a sudden there was this pushback of, hey, these guys, their guts are getting big, they're not as shredded or whatever. And then we actually saw, kind of more of a push towards the classic, and then the actual classic physique class. We started to see these other more aesthetic based classes come out. And now that those are established, it almost seems like bodybuilding's pushing back towards the mass monster. Again, we saw Big Ramy win a couple years, and then Hani and Derek are obviously not as big of humans, but BMI wise, they're still relatively large.
Do you understand what Hani, in my opinion, is the greatest coach on the face of the planet? So this is not a slight on Hani at all. But you do understand when Derek decided to move from 212 class to open class, you do understand the strategy that resulted in that incredible increase in tissue growth. You know the strategy, right?
So, no, fill me in.
Okay. So the strategy is very simple. For years, Derek has been holding himself back. right? He's been trying to slip underneath that weight cap because he was the champion. That all they did was unplug the pipes. That's all they did. People think, oh, it must be this incredible secret program that they have. They go, like, you don't understand. He was using a ridiculously small amount of food and a ridiculously small amount of drugs, and even his training volume was very low, deliberately trying to hold him back. That man just wants to get bigger, right? And you pull the corks out, and oh my God, what did he do? He didn't do anything. They just pulled the corks out.
Yeah, I know Flex Lewis was going through the same thing. I'm more familiar with what he was doing than what Derek was doing.
I consult for pro Olympians in PEDs. You would be surprised by the number of people that compete in things like classic physique, and the amount of drugs they use is very small. Why? It's not because there wasn't a point in their career that they did use what you would call abusive dosages. It's because they're such hyper responders that they realize the weight ceiling incredibly quickly. And they pull back because they have to stop growing. Yeah. People don't understand the difference between the elite and us is they go into the gym and they do exactly the same thing as you and I do, but they get a different response. That's the difference. And the irony is, that is incredibly well documented in the literature. The outlier is, this is a unequivocal evidence that the outlier exists, both from natural training and from Hans practice. They exist. Yeah. And this sport is a sport of the outlier. And what we keep going back to is, why does what Derek is doing or Hanny doing, what the hell does that have to do with Mr. Corporate 3 hours a week? These are completely different discussions in two different rooms, but the problem is that there's only room for so many people in the small room. So the point I was making, though, was more bigger. This is an impractical conversation. The future of bodybuilding is, at some point in time, I passionately believe that we're going to accept that this really is a game of, it's a beauty pageant. It's a human dog show. It's not about training. It's not about nutrition. It's about whether or not you are a genetic outlier to the same stimulus that people put in. And what people are going to realize is this: what causes outcomes in bodybuilders is 10 years of hard work, adherence, discipline, all of your money, all of your time, pick the right parents, willingness to have expose yourself to some risk and all that sort of stuff. The realities of bodybuilding that produce outcomes, right, are not the nuance of tempo, or not rest between sets. They're far bigger blocks, like all of your time, all of your money, adherence, dedication, 10 years of time. So the point I'm making is, you could take two individuals and run them through a program which is the most broke program that you've ever seen in your life, almost laughable, right? And the guy who has the genetic talent will bubble up regardless. I'm sure you know this. I watch elite bodybuilders train all the time, and I just think, that's the worst training style I've ever seen in my life. It's just horrible. And yet the guy's enormous. Why? Because the stimulus that is required to elicit a hypertrophic response is much wider than people think it is. I'll give you a simple example in the literature. I'm sure you're aware of this. The greatest documented evidence of fat-free mass in naturals is not in bodybuilders, it's in sumo wrestlers. So this idea that you have to engage in a certain training methodology and a certain nutritional model to get the maximum fat loss, that's not what the evidence says. The fat-free mass records of wrestlers and football players challenges bodybuilders. What bodybuilders have that these guys don't have is a particular architecture frame, so that when you put the muscle on them and then you peel it away, it's aesthetically pleasing. And the greatest lie about bodybuilding is, any man that wants it, I mean any man that wants it, gets 50 pounds of tissue just for turning up. You all get 50 pounds of tissue. You get 25 pounds as a natural, and then I'll give you a very moderate drug cycle, and you'll put another 25 pounds of tissue on. You've seen the studies. You start growing. If you don't go to the gym, you start taking testosterone, right? Training, the nuance of training is far less important than people think it is. And all of the evidence says that's correct. Observationally, you look at the ways that the bros train, you go, dude, that's the worst training style I've ever seen. And they're huge. We look at sumo wrestlers, the largest fat-free mass on the planet. We look at footballers, look how big they are. They don't train for hypertrophy outcome. Bodybuilding is about this. Everyone gets 50 pounds of tissue. But when I take 10 men and I stick their birthright on their frame, that guy is visually pleasing, right?
Mhm.
It's not about the tissue discussion. It's about the visually pleasing. I'll give you a simple example. I recently started working with a guy called Dr. Lee. He's the guy that runs the Human Performance Research Lab at West Texas University. Yep. Now, the whole point of the exercise was for a bro and an academic to work together, and I was prepping him for contests and recording every call so that people could see the difference between what a bro does and what an academic thinks. Yeah. The reality is that because he runs that Human Performance Research Lab, he has access to body composition retesting on a weekly basis.
Mhm.
So his body composition was such that he had 210 pounds of fat-free mass. That's quite a lot, right? Big guy. But he has a horrible frame. And I say that respectfully, like I have a horrible frame. I'm almost perfectly put together to be a powerlifter. Yeah. But I'm just not put together to be a bodybuilder. And I can want to be a bodybuilder all I want, and I have no problem acquiring skeletal tissue. And here's Dr. Lee Dante with 210 pounds of lean tissue mass. And he looks, I use the term, he looks like dog shit. He looks like me because he doesn't have the right frame. Bodybuilding has got nothing to do with science, right? You made a comment before about, isn't there parallels between what the literature says and what the evidence? Yes, because people don't understand this. We're all saying the same thing. Everybody's already on the same page. There is no dispute. There is no gap. There is no distance between us. The distance between us is a distance of a wedge driven between us by people that want to make money. I wanted to do a collaborative call session with Dr. Lee Dante, whereby we took weekly calls and videoed them so everyone could see openly what the dialogue was and what the outcomes were and body composition testing. We got 3 calls in, and people from your community complained to his university, and he was forced to withdraw. That's how threatened they are by me. Why would people not want to see that? Like, surely the world wants to see an academic that runs a Human Performance Research Lab that speaks at Mr. Olympia every year about hypertrophic response, and me working together collaboratively. Surely the world wants to see that type of content. But someone from the science-based community got his university to say, you have to pull out. What kind of toxic crowd are you guys running?
Well, first off, this is my community, but I can't speak. I'm sure that it was some sort of ethics thing with the public discussion of PEDs or something like that. But
it wasn't that.
I have no idea.
It wasn't that. It was a case of people were giving him shit because he didn't look good.
Yeah.
So, but this is the point. But being a bodybuilder isn't about tissue mass. It's about, does that 50 pounds of tissue look good on your frame?
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page in that there's a genetic limit, and that is going to make it so that basically we're just not, who knows when the next Ronnie Coleman's going to come, or if it's going to come or whatever, right? There's going to be a limit, and sure, maybe there's going to be some small technological things. What I would ask you is, because the sentiment that I've gotten in just from the tone and the way some of this is phrased is that, okay, because there's a genetic limit, that therefore none of this stuff matters. So you mentioned tempo and rest times and whatever. That, okay, do we just not think about any of those things? Because like you were either built to be Mr. Olympia or you weren't. And I mean, I don't think that we can say, yeah, if Ronnie Coleman squatted a little bit deeper, that he would have been better. And I don't think we can say that if Dorian would have been, if he would have done a little bit more volume, that he would have been bigger, because we don't know what actually was the reason that he hit his ceiling. Like what actually, and there's a lot of theories of, okay, what are we running into when we can no longer put on more tissue, right? Is it a cardiovascular thing? Is it a capillary thing? Is it go ahead.
You're right. Can I just tag something on there? But saying that is making shit up. You're literally, with 2 million men following you, making crap up. That's not what the evidence says. That's bad science.
To say that Dorian would get bigger or that Ronnie would get bigger. Yeah, I agree.
Bad science.
Yeah.
So this is my whole rally cry. So let's go back to the point like I was making is, Why would someone like myself, who is an open advocate of evidence-based education, that I hope you appreciate, we don't need to agree on everything, but I'm not an idiot, bro. I have, studied the literature. I understand the domain. I can make a credible argument. I speak very passionately. I have no problem with that, right? I'm quite loud. I get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point is, why am I not allowed at the table? That's the question.
Well, the
why
table
am I
that you're
so
speaking of,
threatening?
I'm
Yeah.
not allowed at really either. Maybe a little bit more than you, but to the people that don't want to talk to me either. And they generally don't want to talk to anybody with a dissenting view. Just you're not being singled out as much as I think you are.
So, Kassem, can we close this circle? Because what you just said then is the entire conversation. What I would argue for people watching this, here's the takeaway. Anyone that is not prepared to allow the opposition voice to speak, right, that goes out of the way to intentionally and deliberately suppress that voice, is not a credible voice in their own right. You have to accept that, right? And so whether you choose to listen to them or not listen to them is your choice. I have no problem with that. But from an academic science perspective, the whole point here is there's the clinical literature, there's the sports science literature, and there's 50 years of hands-on practical experience. And when someone like myself comes to the table that understands both, right, I should be able to speak. Now, what I would argue is this. Really, what the future is about personal choice. In other words, you said, do we even talk about it? Yeah, we talk about it, but we position it in such a way that if Dorian Yates, one of the greatest bodybuilders that ever walked the face of the planet, I would argue if he stepped on stage today in his prime, he would absolutely be top 3 still today, right? There are people that would argue that bodybuilding was better in the 90s. I don't agree. I just don't think we've gotten any better, right? But what I would argue is it's a very credible statement to say he would probably place top 3 even today, yeah, all the way back then, right? So here's the point. If he wants to lower his training volume and be the mass monster that he is, who fucking cares? Like, it's called personal choice, and personal choice is one of the key tenets of evidence-based. So if guys want to do something and it quote unquote works, shut the fuck up. Like, stop busting people's balls because they do things that it falls outside this narrow box of conversation. There's a thing called personal choice. What that means is that if there are a number of choices and someone wants to make that choice and lean into that, they have every right to do that, and they are still evidence-based because it works.
Now, I think some of the people that you have either tagged or mentioned or thrown criticism at, I think definitely would not disagree with any of the things that you have said. And some of them, I know exactly the statements that you're probably going at. You brought up Eric Helms, for example. I don't think that he's going to have any disagreement here. So I guess I would ask, if you were at the table, what is the thing that you want to say?
This is what I want to know. I asked this of Dr. Lee Dante, and I asked this of everyone. What I want to know is this. Dr. Lee speaks at Olympia every year. Yep. If the Olympic Committee asked you to go and speak, right, and you had 30 minutes on the main stage, you don't have all day, you have 30 minutes, and they said, look, we want you to present a line item of knowledge, right, and we want you to talk to this. We want to educate bodybuilders on this, right? And we were able to miraculously, and I know this is a hypothetical, but I just need to bear with me. We were able to transport you back in time to the 1990s. What single line item would you present in 30 minutes that changes what they were doing then? What's different? What's new? What's different to our historical? Because my whole point is nothing has changed in 30 years. It's all churn, right? Now, what Lee said was this. He believes that the most important conversation in training in the last 30 years is the conversation around tempo. I have no problem with that. I don't even want to argue the point, but the point is you need to understand is, but there are other academics that disagree. Now, until we get to the point whereby all of the academics are on the same page, why do we need to have these conversations in the public landscape? Why can we not settle all this, come up with a framework that everyone agrees with, and then present it? Because all you guys are doing now is confusing the hell out of everybody. right?
Well,
And what I'm saying is, my question for you is, so if you were to present at the 1990 Mr. Olympia center stage, 30 minutes, what would you present if they said, teach us something from the future? What would you teach them?
the 30 minutes is the tough thing, right?
But it's just
Because
a line item. What would the
right,
subject be?
probably individual variants, right? That's probably
You
what
don't
I
think
would
we knew
say.
that? You don't think we know that
So,
then?
well, I think when it comes down to those things, it's like, oh, do you know this or not? I think it comes down to understanding the degree of flexibility that has, because that's the questions people are always is like, how far can I go in one direction or another before I've maybe wandered too far? Giving people like some ideas of spectrums and checks and balances. I think that's the best thing that we could do, or that I could say I could go back, is give people the tools to troubleshoot figuring out how, like, that process, because I mean, my brand is N of one, that's what it is, right? So when it comes down to, oh, okay, how do I actually evaluate, is this exercise working for me, is this the right rest period, is this the right volume? That's what I would do, because it's okay, a lot of those principles were known, but were there good tools or systems or logic in place of doing that, where you could shorten the amount of experimental time that was needed before you really figured things out for your
Perfect.
body?
So let me interrupt you there. That's the point that I'm making. You literally just said we were having that discussion 30 years ago, and we were. And that's my whole claim is there aren't any new conversations, there aren't any new discussions in the last 30 years. We're just still churning everything over. And this is why I say to guys like Lay Norton, show me a study done on training or nutrition in the last 30 years that actually changes the way bodybuilders train, that you would take back to the 90s and show people and say, look, what you guys are doing now is wrong. This is how we do it in this era. And this is so, you know, it blocks me. Like, this is the whole point, is like, when I ask people questions, I would argue asking you the question, can you show me, can you nominate a line item that is a new discussion thread? Can you show me a study that changes? Why can I not ask these questions? Why does Eric block me? Why does Lane Norton block me? Why not just say, I don't know, like, there's not very much, we're talking about the same shit? Because that's my whole point. I'm right. We are having the exact same conversations that we were having when I started bodybuilding 40 years ago. Nothing has changed. We've just got different voices churn. And this is the closing argument, is if that is true, I would argue what coaches need to understand is that, look, if these guys haven't figured this out in 40 years, where they can definitively say, boom, right, in the same way that I have with PEDs. And what I mean by that is I'm moving on from educating about PEDs because there's only so much to say. You know, this is the framework, and you teach to people, and now I move on. I'm not going to sit there for the next 30 years churning it, because I've exhausted everything that I want to say. I'm going to move on. But if I am dependent on that conversation for money, I'm going to churn it. And this is the whole point, is he's right. All of these conversations, one, are not new. Two, they're just churn. And three, what's the point of listening if it's just churn?
So if we get philosophical for a minute, you could argue that there's nothing new in human existence, period, right? And you can say, okay, the conversations are just turning over, and that they're not a new conversation. But the thing is that every day it is a new conversation for somebody.
Oh, 100%.
Right. So the fact that the fact that the conversations come on, neither one of us are spring chickens. There comes a point where your ability to relate and communicate to the younger audience actually it's the same information needs to be basically churned down into the modern day language, and by somebody that is relatable, etc. Right? I mean,
good at marketing.
right?
This is my whole point. We're on the same page, because all I'm simply saying, I'm trying to explain to guys, is this is all churn. Just accept it, embrace it. Hell, do whatever the hell you want to do, but don't piss in my pocket and tell me it's new. It's not new. All that's happening is we are churning the same things, and we need younger men. You have to understand, this tribe turns over every 5 years. Every 5 years, it's an entirely new audience. And the guys walking in the door have never heard any of this before. And it's fascinating. But for a guy like myself, just the fact that I'm the wise old head massively hampers my ability to reach young men. I'm just an old man. What do I know? I'm a grandfather, right? So the point I'm making is I just want people to accept the fact that the realities of this is I don't have any problem with people returning the content. In fact, they should. And I don't have any problem putting the spin on it where you can brand the nuance to make yourself have unique competitive advantage. I don't have any problem with that. What I have a problem with is the delusion that's what's going on. As long as we accept that's what's going on, that's my whole point. There's nothing new in bodybuilding.
Do you not believe, even though the base topic has changed, and with any industry, with any topic, obviously the biggest chunk of the conversation comes early, and then the longer it exists, the contributions get smaller and more nuanced over time. But they do get better. And so my argument would be like, yeah, okay, we talk about volume, we talk about intensity, whatever, you pick anything, right? These conversations cycle, but every time they're cycling in, do we have a little bit more evidence? Are we a little bit more confident here? I mean, obviously we have, like, the observational anecdotal data just builds over time, the more people that are doing this, and then our ability to like take that stuff and just our ability to communicate it gets better. Our ability to put it into application or to individualize those topics gets better over time. So I think I don't think so many people are saying, like, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think certain people on this list are like, hey, this is this brand new thing, as much as it is, here's the next layer of the onion that we now have on this topic, because we have the last study was 6 years ago. Here's this new piece of thing, right? Or, hey, now that I've been running this program for 5 years, and now I'm updating my model to put in that last 5 years of experience. Here are the little things that I've learned on, but I haven't completely reinvented the wheel. I turned a knob different here or there. I have some variants.
The next layer of conversation is right around the corner. In fact, it's right in front of us. Yeah. And I'll tell you what it is. Something has to happen. We need to accept that there needs to be a table of guys where there's academics and the voice of experience at the same table, and they both hold equal weight. Well, we cannot move forward until we accept that we need that dialogue. Right? Today,
I think that
impossible to argue. And it's impossible to argue that there is not a massive gap between the science evidence-based community and professional bodybuilding. There's a massive gap, right? Like there's not a single example of an elite high-profile athlete that is science heavy. There's not a single example of an elite high-profile coach that is science heavy, right? The interesting thing is I'm the closest thing that I have that bridges the gap, because I have a foot in both camps, right? But I'm the pariah. And what I'm saying is, like, if we want to move forward, what we have to accept is we need to create an environment where experience has equal weight to academic credential, because that's the reality. Yeah. And this is the toxin that poisons the tribe globally. The gap between us and the refusal to bring them close together. And the reason that people refuse to bring them close together is when you bring them close together, you will find that there is virtually nothing that separates us. You have a group of guys that know what they know through practical experience, and you have a group of guys that have been documenting that journey and agreeing, going, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Right? So even like frequency, the conversation about frequency, you do understand that Arnold preferred frequency of 3 times a week. Arthur Jones, the founder of HIIT, suggested a 3 times frequency. Dorian Yates liked to train twice a week. Who else we talk about? Jay Cutler trained once a week. This idea that frequency, like, this has been going on forever. But here's the point. If Dorian wants to train twice a week, let him. Yeah. If Arnold wants to train 3 times a week, let him. If Jay wants to train once a week, let him. They're all Mr. Olympias. Who is arrogant enough to say that one is better than the other? They work for that individual, and that's called personal choice. Right? So this idea that we keep wanting to exclude personal choice from evidence-based is insane. As long as you are happy, and as long as you are progressing, as long as you have the same tissue mass or better than any of the sides guys, right? Who cares what you're doing? As long as you don't cause harm to yourself or to others, who cares?
Who do you
We need to.
who do you think in the evidence-based space is saying to exclude personal choice?
Well, yeah, I just gave an example. If someone says the evidence says that Dorian Yates would have been bigger if he trained using the Renaissance period, I say, isn't that the claim? That he could have made Dorian bigger? If he says Ronnie Coleman would have had better legs if he squat the way I squat, isn't that the claim?
Is that the claim that their preference would not matter? I think it's a straw man to frame it like that, if I'm being fair. I think, I disagree with those statements, but I think it's a straw man to say that because that statement was made, this person doesn't believe that personal
No,
preference.
his opinion.
Mhm.
It's his opinion, and anyone
Yeah,
is
so
entitled to their opinion.
so I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, this person had this preference, but I think that if they would have done something different, they might have gotten better results than their preference, because something could be a preference for you and you could make the mistake of, because I mean, anecdote, while it's very important, the cause and effect confidence isn't always there. So sometimes you might be like, oh, I'm going to do it this way because I think this is happening, and really it was another thing causing that, and you could have then made a preference or a choice that didn't serve you as well as something else could have.
Not only are you right, but the reality is that these elite bodybuilders, I'm telling you, anything works. They just do shit and it works. People don't understand that. Like they're so sensitive to stimulus that you end up with a situation like have these outliers. We talked about the current Mr. Olympia. Yeah. He's holding himself back, trying not to grow. So who in this world is holding themselves back to try and make a weight class? Only the elite. Everyone else is busting a nut, trying to put on as much tissue as they can, and they do that in a very moderate way. And then you have elite outliers that are going, I can only take this much drugs because if I do that, I'll never make the weight cap. Yeah. And this becomes a somewhat circular conversation. There's not a man listening to this that can disagree with what I'm saying. So what's the disagreement? That's the point. The whole disagreement is people mistake the realities of business and the realities of robust scientific discourse. There is no argument about the discourse. We're all on the same page, but everybody has this need to separate their brands somehow uniquely. This is the classic case of it. Go back to Menno Hanson. What the fuck is Bayesian bodybuilding? It's a brand that he wants to identify as unique and different and special, but it doesn't produce better outcomes for an individual based on personal choice. I have no problem with that.
Now, is Menno advertising that his program produces a certain outcome, or is he simply saying, hey, I have compiled evidence, and he's giving that evidence for the decisions that he's making in that program?
What evidence has he compiled? That's the question. I'm robustly open to showing you my evidence. What I would argue is that observationally, science-based training doesn't produce a different result than just turning up and doing stuff.
Okay.
There's no evidence that science-based training even works differently, like in a statistically different way than just turning up and doing shit.
Okay, well, let's break that apart. So we can't say that there's no evidence that scientific, because by nature, when we do these studies and we see that one intervention outperformed another, well, therefore, right there's evidence that performing in one way resulted in better hypertrophy than another approach.
That's not
right?
correct. Can I correct that?
So how is that not evidence?
So the flaw with these studies is this: if you understand that in the first year of training you will get X outcome, and the second year of training you will get a diminished return, and the third year of diminished return, and it's just how it is. That's just observationally true, right? Yes. I don't know that we have a study that shows that. Do we? Do you know if there's a study that shows diminished return over time?
Yes, there are a couple looking at hypertrophy in both training age, and then we also have like chronological age as well.
I'm not aware. Yes. Tell me if I'm not aware that training age is even sorted in studies. So that data is automatically corrupted by knowing this variable. If you understand that year 1, 2, year 3 produce different outcomes across the board, and then you conduct a training study where you don't separate into, that data is corrupted by nature.
The majority, especially in probably research in the last 10, 15 years, when they're doing their randomization, they do it so that the training age averages in the groups are very similar. So they look at those type of things.
What's the average training age?
In resistance train studies, well, each
Yeah.
study is going to have its own qualification, right? And so some will be like, okay, they'll call a trained subject somebody that's had 1 year. Another study might say, hey, it's 3 years. Another study might say whatever. And then they'll give you like, what is the range and average training age of those groups, right? And with the randomization, they will be similar. If it's 3.4 years in group A, it won't be like 7.5 or 1. It'll be relatively close to 3.4.
No, I understand that, but
right?
training age is absolutely critical to any training study. Like I
Yes,
would argue it's the most
training age.
important paradigm.
Well, actually, probably the most important is the exact prior training.
Yeah.
Right. So what
But
you were doing immediately before, and that also with newer research is something that they're looking at is, okay, what training, like how much volume, et cetera, what exercises were you doing before the study? Do you have a washout period before that to try and minimize the influence of prior training on the intervention, et cetera. Right. So
yeah, I agree with you, but this is the challenge is it's just like the conversation about recombinant human growth hormone, right? I passionately don't believe that the clinical evidence is robust enough for us to create a use case for the application of growth hormone. Yeah, I do, right?
Yeah.
Based on observation, right? So there's the literature's not right. And in the training studies, the criteria that I set, if I was designing a training studies, I've never seen a training study set up the way that I would set up a training study. Because I believe as a consequence of the fact that you're not even following a methodology that I would follow, and I understand this is a line of bias. I get that, right? It's my opinion. But if not one training study I've ever read is the methodology that I would be arguing for, then that tarnishes my opinion about the data.
So
and the argument is
can you give me like some insights into what you would like to see?
I want to see a training age I want to see a training age that's literally done over like the expected 6 weeks is not, it's not, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to grasp insight. Everyone understands the reality of it. I'll give you a simple example. I'm going to change tracks and I'll come back and answer the question if I don't answer to your satisfaction. Hair loss discussion is a multi-decade discussion. Yeah. It takes multiple decades to go from the beginning of the conversation to the ultimate outcome of hair loss, right? There isn't a single hair loss study that covers the life cycle of the problem. They're all snapshots in time, right? And until we have a study that begins here and ends here, we're guessing at shit. Right? What I would argue is that many of the issues that are underpin the problems of hair loss are muted. But for example, I have a 14-year-old son who's going through puberty, and his DHT levels are through the fucking roof at the moment. They're outrageous, right? Far higher than you would expect to see in the average individual that's suffering from androgenic alopecia. So the correlation of DHT was, well, if that's true, why do teenagers that experience massively elevated DHT levels not experience the consequence of male pattern balding? And that is because there are other criteria that need to be on the table, other pre-existing conditions, right? So the problem with training studies is, just like with a hair loss study, to have a credible hair loss study, you need to study the life cycle of a hair follicle, which is not 6 weeks. No study exists like that. I'm not aware of a study that follows athletes on their journey from entering to the gym to year 3. That's what I want to see. Now, I understand, I'm not arguing the complexities, the impracticality of that. We all understand that. Yeah. But what I'm arguing is there isn't really good data because, in my opinion, how you walk into the gym and who you train with and how you train, like, it's so artificially constructed that it doesn't represent what actually happens in the real world. We're forced through the constraints of budget and time and that to artificially modulate the parameters we're studying, that it virtually by definition, it infers things rather than proves things.
Yeah. So science is not like there. And I'll quote Eric Helms, is like, science doesn't tell you what to do on a Tuesday, right?
Correct.
Like that. So science is there for us to get a framework. It's there for us to pull principles. It's there for us to be more confident in the cause and effect of certain interventions, certain mechanisms, etc. But when you look at evidence, there is an inverse relationship between context and confidence. When you have your anecdote includes all the context of you and everything you're doing, your environment, your genetics, etc., and you're like, I do A versus I do B, this is what happens. That's fully contextual. However, the confidence that you can have and cause and effect of, hey, was it because I did more training volume? Was it because I ate more, slept better? There's so many things that could be influencing that change. With research, we have to strip away the context to isolate a variable. But then when only one thing changes, we obviously have more confidence in that, hey, if only one thing changes, then that's the effect of this thing. And
but
then
we both
the
agree
role
that
of
that's how
coaches,
science works.
yes, but
Yeah.
the role of coach and the role of an athlete is to be able to take those two things and try and meet them somewhere. But not that one is valuable and the other is not, and one is evidence and one, they're both pieces of evidence, right? And how we can use them is different. So when we take science, it's okay. Science can help me have a framework of like where to start people. I combine that with my experience, and then I can be like, okay, this person maybe fits more on this side of the frame. This person is a little bit more on this side of the frame, right?
This is the challenge, Kassem. I'm in perfect agreement with you. The challenge is this is the pieces that guys miss. What I'm suggesting is observationally, if you look at the differences between the 1,000 most successful bodybuilders of all time, right, and line up the differences between their training programs, they're so disparate that it's very hard to find a common thread. Now, logically, what that says is, well, maybe how you train doesn't matter very much. Like in the real world context of these are the champions, and the classic examples. So Arnold Schwarzenegger trained this way, and Mike Mentzer trained this way, and they were both champions. Arnold Schwarzenegger leg into this drug strategy, and Mike Mentzer into this drug strategy. And if you're not aware, they did follow different drug strategies, and they're both champions. The point being I'm making is what we need to pull out from this is the things they had in common, and what we need to set aside is the things that were disparate, were different, right?
Why though? There were complex systems. So the differences may have been actually what made either successful.
I would argue,
because let's say you take Mike Mentzer and Arnold and you just flip them and they do the other one's training. Maybe they both end up dog shit. Maybe they'd still be good, but they wouldn't be to the potential that they had if they chose the opposite training strategy, because maybe they gravitated towards the strategies that were successful to them. And so that their differences were made them successful, not necessarily what they had in common. When we're dealing with complex systems, right? Yeah, but it's still, that's the differences. So when we have complex systems, it's not always the things that are in common that make us like, oh, that's for sure the thing that's leading to the success in a complex system. Like A can be doing one thing and B can be doing another thing, and it could be the different things respective to those complex systems that made them successful.
Let me give you a practical, well-worn example. What I mean. Let's go back to our 3 hours a week client.
Okay.
Yep. What I would argue is that guy really should be training all 8 body parts. Like the idea of training half of your body doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So we need to train it. I would argue he is going to need a squat variant. He'll need a hip hinge. You understand what I mean? Like there's certain generic frameworks. So let's just talk about squat. What I would argue is I would recommend that any client needs a squat variant, right? And there are 25 different squat variants that you could plausibly put on the table. But let's just argue and say there's 5, right? What I would argue he should do is he should try all 5, and he should pick the one that speaks to him. Not based on what studies say, not based on hypothetical. You should just try. These are all valid, known to be successful because we've used them for 50 years to great effect, right? And tell me which one speaks to you, right? And if it speaks to you and you're good at it and you enjoy it, you will be successful doing it, right?
So
it is far more about these are the variables, and then there's personal choice. Yeah. So if we had a guy that has 3 hours, I would argue, and if my first recommendation to him was, we'll probably start on a full body workout, 3 times a week, right? I don't know that there's anyone that's going to disagree with that. That's a rational thing. Now, someone wants to say, no, I'm going to put him on upper lower split. Fine. What I would argue is the delta between those choices, between doing a full body and doing a split, it's hard to say it's robust based on the current body of data that we have. It's about, does it speak to you? So I typically work on this basis. Right. You need to do a squat variant. I want to show you 5 different valid squat variants. And what I want you to do over time is I want you to try all 5 of them. Yeah. And I want you to tell me which one speak to you. If they all speak to you equally, great. But 9 times out of 10, a client will come back and say, I prefer this or I prefer that. And so this is how I guide my clients based on personal choice.
So,
yeah. And that this is no different to the science-based educators. It's all everyone wants to muddy the water because everyone wants to think that they're saying something different. We have been saying that for 40 years. There's nothing new in that conversation. 40 years ago, Dorian Yates proved to us that you can squat in the Smith machine if you want to. It's a valid choice. People don't understand the same conversations were 40 years ago. People were arguing Dorian Yates doesn't do high barbell squats. There was a discussion. It's his personal choice. You should try it. And if it speaks to you, and the only point I'm making here is we aren't disagreeing on anything here. There's this perception that we're saying different things, but we're saying, all I'm saying is that's a conversation that dates back 40 years. Here's some valid choices. They are demonstrable either in clinical evidence or through observation and anecdote. And you as the client should try them and tell me if it speaks to you. And if it speaks to you and it's successful, what more do we need to know?
I guess the one of the hardest things for me to grasp is it just seems like some of your criticisms are non-existent, even though they're being like mentioned. And so that's where it's confusing to me, because you will say like that basically we'll be like, oh, we agree. But it'll be like, well, then why are we yelling and screaming about this topic if we're essentially already in agreement? I guess I don't know what the strong objective is, where the anger and criticism is coming from on some of these things.
My entire point is that this entire community have the same fundamental knowledge base. There are no secrets. For 50 years, the bros have been trying to sell a secret sauce, whether you understand that or not. Elite professionals have been suggesting that their training program is more effective and the evidence they offer is their own personal outcome. That's the weakest argument ever. You're a genetic outlier. Anything works. But do you acknowledge that for 50 years, the bros have been trying to sell the secret sauce? You know that. Agreed?
Well, everybody wants to have the magic thing. And a lot of times people are promoting their preference or what worked for them as the magic
as the secret sauce.
Right.
Now we're at the thing, yes.
And if you are an avatar for that person, maybe it will be the best model for you, right? But if you aren't, which is why you shouldn't basically be like, hey, I'm just going to follow this guy's program because it's his thing and he looks good. You should focus on what actually works for you.
But here's the thing. So we're right at the breakthrough. This is the moment where we have an epiphany. Okay. So if you understand that for 50 years, the genetically elite have been suggesting that they have some secret sauce for sale, right? And they don't. There is no secret sauce, right? We have now transitioned to
other than the literal secret sauce.
Yeah, correct. But even the secret sauce, even the PED model, everyone was doing the same thing. Yeah. But everyone wanted to make it sound like they were doing something, but they were all literally doing the same thing, but trying to make it sound like they had some unique take. Why? For branding, for monetization of attention. That's just how it works. Right. So now we've transitioned to a new era where people say, look, when you walk into a gym and you see the biggest guy in the room, don't believe that knowledge is correlated to outcome. It's not. But we've come full pendulum now saying, but knowledge is not correlated to outcome. So just because someone has a PhD, right, or just because someone presents themselves as an evidence-based trainer, they don't have the secret sauce because there is no secret sauce. The bros don't have the secret sauce. The PhDs don't have the secret sauce. The secret sauce is this, and that is knowledge does not correlate to bodybuilding outcomes. It never has. It never will. There are certain universal frameworks that you have to know, and if you relentlessly execute them over time, and you put all your time and all your money, and you pick the right parent, you will be successful. The talent bubbles to the top. And my whole argument is we transition from the bros trying to sell the secret sauce when there is none to academics trying to leverage the fact that, well, I'm a PhD, I know more. And all I'm saying is, but you do understand that knowledge doesn't correlate to bodybuilding outcomes. And that was totally okay when we talk about the biggest guy in the gym. But now it's, well, if knowledge doesn't correlate to bodybuilding outcomes, why do we gravitate towards insisting on pushing people up that have credentials? You're on the same footing as everybody's on the same footing. We all know the same things.
So you take issue with the fact that people with credentials are looked at in a brighter light?
I take issue with the fact that people have been critical of the fact that I don't have credentials in this discipline. What does it matter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, why isn't it a fair criticism, right? I mean, is it not? I mean, it's not to say that you are not good, but it is. I don't have a PhD, and so somebody's but I don't have a PhD. I'm like, yeah, that is an accomplishment that is not on my resume. Now, I can argue that I don't think it holds me back from doing these things, but is that a fit? Just like I'm not Mr. Olympia, or I'm not a lot of things, right? Those are all fair critiques. Yeah, people like, I'll talk about something and somebody like, oh, well, why aren't you bigger or whatever? I'm like, well, I'm not a bodybuilder, right? I'm not, right? I'm a teacher.
Knowledge doesn't correlate to bodybuilding outcomes. You can't. So you look at, I mean, we take guys like Brad Schoenfeld, like one of the sharpest guys in the business. Knowledge doesn't correlate to bodybuilding outcomes. It doesn't. It just doesn't. You can't make that connection. Like, he can speak on something with great authority, but it doesn't manifest itself in an outcome that's different to anyone else's.
Now, let me ask you a question. In terms, if we get away from the most genetically gifted, right? Does knowledge then help you with your potential?
No.
Right? Meaning that, okay, if I want to be the best version of me, does training a little bit smarter, eating a little bit more efficient, et cetera?
I'll tell you why. And that is because, in theory, I'm not opposed to the idea. But you have to understand the thousands of hours that I spent down the rabbit hole self-educating myself about PEDs. It was an outrageous investment of my time. How did I manage to make that investment of time? Because I'm not from this world. I built successful companies. I sold one large company at 35 years old, and I retired. I didn't need to work anymore. And so I had the great luxury of retiring. I moved to Thailand. I went fishing for 6 months and I got bored, right? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to teach myself something, like, just to keep my mind active. And I spent thousands of hours down the rabbit hole learning about PEDs. And what I'm suggesting is, coaches are coaches. They're not researchers. They're not academics. They're coaches. Mm-hmm. And what coaches need to understand is that you make a living as a coach by client-facing billable hours. A coach today needs to spend 25 billable hours in front of their clients if you want to make a decent living. Yep. And you need to spend time building your brand. We mentioned at the beginning, this is really an industry of marketers, not of knowledge holders. Right? So if you're a coach and you're billing out 25 billable hours a week, and you're spending, let's arguably say, 25 hours a week building your brand, ongoing education is fulfilled on top of that 50-hour commitment. So this is my whole point. We cannot afford to be dragging coaches down a rabbit hole to have complex conversations about minutiae. We need to massively simplify these conversations and get on the same page, and just tell coaches the bare minimum of what they need to do. I'll give you a simple example. I can tell you everything you need to know about growth hormone in 30 minutes. Now, if you're a researcher or an academic, that's a ridiculous statement. But if you're a coach and you're simply making prescriptive recommendations to a client, what you need to know is mind-bogglingly simple. Yeah. And the whole point I'm making is there needs to be 2 rooms. I keep going back to this point. I can teach someone everything they need to know about PEDs for the rest of their life for $97, a one-time fee. You'll never need to learn anything else. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a room over here that we can have technically interesting, at times fascinating conversations about PEDs, but I don't want to drag coaches into that room, because coaches need to be in front of their clients. And coaches need to be, marketing. And this is my whole point I'm making. It is the problem isn't my being offended. The problem is we are pulling coaches into conversations that lead nowhere rather than telling them, listen, don't worry about it. It's minutia. Go and focus on building a business. You need to be in front of clients. You need to charge fair amounts of money, and you need to basically, market yourself. The most important skills for clients, for coaches today, is not technical knowledge. It's how do I build a brand? How do I make the phone ring? And instead, we're pulling them to these conversations about minutiae that don't go anywhere. We are doing a massive disservice to the coaches of this world by making out this education stuff it doesn't matter. It's interesting, but it's a conversation for you and me. It's not a conversation that we need to pull coaches into. I can teach you everything you need to know about PEDs from beginning to end for $100. Why? Because I don't talk about stuff that doesn't matter.
Okay. So how well do you think that logic extends outside of the topic of PEDs when we start talking about training? Like, for instance, biomechanics is a field that, we're well known for. You talked about squat patterns. Okay, you're going to choose from whatever, but there's a multitude of techniques for each of those exercises. And there's ways to adjust those.
Let's do food first, because food is easier. We'll come back to training.
Okay.
So here's the food. So what I would suggest coaches need to know this. When I first started training 40 years ago, we were told 1 gram of protein per lean pound of body weight. That recommendation holds true today. We were told 100 grams of fat. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not variables on the side of it. That's where we start. You start by giving someone 1 gram of protein. It's enough. And then what you do is the balance of caloric intake is in carbohydrate. And you titrate the carbohydrate intake up and down based on demand. Okay. Now, what happens is over time, what you'll find is that individual, you can give them a little bit more protein, you can give a little bit less protein, you can turn the knobs a little bit, and you can seek out how they respond as a genetically unique individual. But the fundamentals of bodybuilding nutrition are 1 gram of protein per lean pound of body weight, 100 grams of fat, and the balance in carbs we titrate in increments. And we need to turn the knobs to find out what speaks to them. It's not a terribly complicated conversation. An egg meal, a chicken meal, a fish meal, a beef meal, some rice, some potatoes, I don't eat potatoes, no problems. You don't need to eat potatoes. It's not that hard, right? Dr. Eric Helms charged $250 a month for food-only coaching with his clients for 2 calls a month. And my question is to him is, what do you get for that? In my opinion, you are telling them 1 gram of protein, 100 grams of fat, change the carbohydrates, 4 to 6 meals a day. You're saying the same things we were doing 40 years ago for free. We were telling people for free, but today it's a paid service. It's like, how complicated is food? This is the caller saying about Dr. Lee Dante is, I coached him for 3 weeks. Week 1, we set some macros and the scale weight started to fall. You know what we did on week 2? Nothing. You know what we did on week 3? Nothing. Why? Because the scale was coming down. There weren't any changes to the plan because the macro profile that we set for him and cleaning up his diet resulted in 8 pounds of fat washed off in this time block. This is not rocket science. Go ahead. So, yes, go ahead.
Do you think that's the actual service and value that you're getting from the nutrition coaching from 3DMJ? Do you think it's just, oh, hey, we're just giving you this? Or do you think that the value in there, because I've seen a lot of your posts talking about the prices that people charge for things. And it makes me wonder what you think people pay for, because in most instances, it's not the information. It's not the knowledge. It is I don't want to make the decision, or I want to be able to ask these questions, or I want solutions to my problems. And I want that to be from somebody that I trust, that I get on with, etc. And so when I look at people and whatever they charge or whatever, I could think, to me, that value could be good or bad, etc. Right? And it's a free market, right? So nobody's paying for anything that they don't think is worth it. But I don't think it's fair there to be like, oh, well, this is all they're getting, because I mean, I know enough about that program. Basically, I mean, I have everything. I have Menno's program. I have the 3DMJ Vault. And as somebody that basically is an educational source for personal trainers, we consume basically every product out there so that we can inform our students. And the value for a lot of these things, and even the stuff that that we have to that we tell our coaches to focus on, is like it's the service and it's the problem solving. Like that's what you're selling, right? So it's not like, hey, here's your macros and then here's the 20-gram change or whatever, right? That is right. It's the, hey, I'm having this problem following my macros, right? It's solving those problems.
Here's what I would
that's
argue.
probably what that 249 or whatever is not for. Hey, here's one adjustment for a spreadsheet. It is for the service that helps that client actually follow that spreadsheet. And they have a system and a communication and tools and resources, et cetera, to help that. This is
what I would argue to you, and understanding I'm giving advice to young coaches here. Yeah. I would argue that if you come across an elite athlete, someone that just says, wow, like this is the guy, you shouldn't charge him anything. What you should do is collaboratively work with him to help him on his career and leverage that success in your marketing, just like Hanny Rumbar does. That's his entire business model. He pays his athletes. Okay. So if you come across someone who's elite, there is no financial transaction. It's free, but you have a collaboratively, mutually beneficial relationship. And you can sink as many hours as you like into those people. Okay. Now, that's your marketing. And then it comes to people that pay the bills. Every coach that has clients know that there's star athletes that make their Instagram roster, and then there's the men behind the scenes that pay the bills. When it comes to the men behind the scenes that pay the bills, I would argue $100 an hour for your time is very fair for everyone. Okay? And I should also argue that if you can't teach those average Joes what they need to know in 30 minutes a week after you've set them up, you don't know what you're doing. All right? Any check-in that is longer than 30. So if I charge $200 a month and you're average Joe and I give you 30 minutes of my time like this a week, everybody's happy. It's fair for you. It's fair for me. Now, if you believe that I have some magical secret sauce, you understand there's coaches out there that are charging $1,600 an hour. An hour. That's a scam, right? I will teach you everything you need to know about PEDs, $100. Why? Because enough people come through my course that it's a volume discussion, right? Why would individuals, there's a guy called Alex Kiki, I don't expect this, it's $9,000 to do his PED course. It's just a scam. The whole point is this perception is that, well, I know more than anyone else, so I charge a premium. So here's the point. Someone like, let's take Gerard Feather. He charges $600 a month to do coaching. He teaches my PED models, which he learned, right, from me, and he charges $600. I want to know, what does a client get for $600? What I would argue is this. If it's an elite client, you do it for free because it's mutually beneficial. If it's an average client, you should be spending 2 hours a month with them, 30 minutes a week. How do we get to $600? Like, you're using my educational content and charging. Where's the money? Here's the problem. The money is what you're paying for is what's called a celebrity premium, right? Because I have a high profile, the market will bear more. And as long as the market understands what a celebrity premium means, I don't give a fuck. But what I would argue is most people in this industry don't know what that the premium is for the profile. They assume it must be for the knowledge. And this is the whole point I'm trying to get out is if everyone knows the same thing and this coach charges $200 a month and you get 2 hours a month of his time for that, and this guy knows exactly the same thing and he charges $600, I don't care less as long as the client knows it's a choice. That you're paying for the knowledge, that's the celebrity premium. If we're communicating that and the clients know what they're buying, no problem. But the truth is people still think the secret sauce is on offer. They really do. You understand, like when people believe that Hanny Rombard does things differently, you know that. They think that, right? So I would love to work with Hanny because he's
FS7.
awesome. Correct. But you understand, I don't have a problem with Hanny selling that because it's how he makes his revenue, right? But the irony is, I don't hear Hanny undermining anyone. He keeps to himself and he wins athletes and he makes content and he has his training app and he just gets on with business. It's all the evidence-based guys it's the same as you're like, it's the evidence-based guys that are causing all the fucking problems. You don't hear Neil Hill, Hanny Rombard, any of the best coaches undermining anyone. They keep in their own lane. And everybody knows who knows FS7 is just, it's his spin on a training program. There's nothing special about it.
So
right? The reason he produces such great athletes is he picks the right athletes to work with and then he pays them.
Yep. That's what I was going to say. Does he make winners or pick winners? And I think
no, he picks them 100%.
Right.
But this is what I'm saying about if you want to be a great coach, part of this process is you need to go out and identify talent. You don't make champions that come in the door. What you do is you go, right, there's 2 rooms here. I'm going to find a half a dozen clients to work with, and I will work with them for free. Hell, I might even do a Hanny Rombard and pay them to work with me, right? And then you leverage those guys into marketing, but understand that the people that pay the bills are the 70 guys on your roster. But here's the deceptive part. Those 70 guys on the roster genuinely believe that they have a shot. They really do. That's not clear. We don't make that clear to people where we say, hey, listen, these 5 athletes I work with, the reason they look that way is they're genetically gifted and you can work with me, no problem. But just understand, you're never going to fucking look like that. That level of transparency does not exist. And I don't expect
rare.
it to exist. I don't expect it to. All I'm asking us to do is there's a difference between what I expect coaches to say to the market and what I expect us to say when we're having honest conversations. Honest conversation is Hanny is the most successful coach because he picks champions and he grooms them. That's why he's who he is, right? And then all of the 2 million people that follow him are the hopeful young men that think he's got the secret sauce, but he doesn't have the secret sauce. Now, as long as I'm talking about Hanny, everyone in the science-based community is no problems. Now, when I talk about other people and I say, but the same applies to everyone else, Mike Israetel is a credible 212 bodybuilder, but he looks that way because he trained for a natural for 10 years and he's used drugs for 10 years. And that's what happens when you're 5'6" and you train for 20 years, 10 of them aren't. That's what happens. There's no magic. There's no science. That's just the outcome. Now, he doesn't have the genetics to be an elite competitor, and that's why he's not an elite competitor. He's the credible bodybuilder, but I would argue is there's a million bros that know absolutely nothing that can stand alongside him, right, and be better than him, and they know nothing. Why? Because knowledge is not correlated to bodybuilding outcomes.
Now, if we want to, I think when you throw in genetics and you throw in PEDs, right, and you look at magnitude of effect, right, like even if we look at just genetics and we look at, okay, in research we can see that, okay, if 1x is the average intervention, that there will be outliers in the study that will have a 4x response, right? Like that's just right. And then we'll have some people that have like literally below 1, like and negative, like non-responders or whatever, right? So the magnitude of individual variation is larger than the majority of what we could see manipulating any training variable, whether that be volume, proximity to failure, range of motion, tempo, et cetera. Like all of these things now have incrementally smaller impacts.
There's subfractional
in the
inputs.
Research, right?
There's subfractional inputs.
Yep. Now, that scale gets smaller when you get further away from the genetic outliers, right? So when you start working more with the people that are quote unquote normal average people, the percentage of a difference that those training variables might make in their rate of progress and their potential, I think goes up. So I think that the more of a genetic outlier you are, and then if you add in PEDs, right, then the nuances of training have a smaller percentage of impact and ultimately likely aren't going to be the things that limit your absolute magnitude because they're just not going to be relevant because those other two things are impacting your growth so much, your genetics and the PEDs. And then just like any training under that much growth pressure is just going to do its job. But as soon as you start to pull back away from that, I think that's where then these training variables start to be able to make more of a significant difference for the people that aren't gifted. And that's something, it's coaching personal trainers that mostly coach regular people. Like I have my experience working with IFBB pros, et cetera, whatever. And I'm very familiar with the reality of, okay, cool. These people, they grow muscles that they don't even train, right? That's just the reality of it.
That's how it
You
is.
can't expect that.
Here's the thing, because I know where you're getting at, but this is where I'm not a scientist. I'm just a very practical engineer. The reality is that the application of growth promoters has such a magnitude of impact over and above whatever you want to talk about that for this purpose, because what I would argue is this: you should train for 3 to 5 years as a natural. And if you turn up and do everything right, you're going to get a return that is, let's just argumentatively say it's 25 pounds of tissue. Now, if you want to make the argument that by turning every possible knob that it could be 27, I honestly don't have a problem with it. I don't, right? That's the whole, there's another room conversation. Do you understand what I mean? But what I'm saying is it's literally the Pareto principle. It's 20% of the inputs produce 80% of the outcome. It's just observationally true. So everyone that turns up gets 25 pounds. And the whole science argument is, can we get there faster? Can we produce better? That's the whole argument. And what I would argue is, but even bros tap out after 3 or 4 years. It's not a 20-year journey. It's a 3 or 4 and it's over. Okay. So when you speed up, do you mean they could get there in 3 years instead of 4? That's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And then the question is, so if that guy gets 25 by just turning up and doing something, is it plausible that if we pulled him aside and we redirected him, we might get 27? I honestly have no problem. But what I would argue is this. So then the guy who just gets the 25 opens up the PED door and he picks up 25 pounds of tissue just for turning up again. Like, I'm the guy, you have to remember who I am. The reason I'm so passionate about this is I'm the guy that trained as a natural for 20 years, believing I could do it. I don't have any regrets in life, but like the one thing, if I could go back and speak to a younger version of me, there's a couple of things I would say. One, that I should have started using drugs much earlier. I naively believed that if I wanted it badly enough and I tried hard enough, that I'm so stupid. I thought Arnold was natural when I was young. You know what I mean? Because they didn't talk about drugs. I believed it. And the point I'm making is 3 to 5 years, and then either open the door or don't open the door. If you want to open the door, the gains are just given to you on a paper plate for fucking turning up and taking the drugs, right? So if the desire is return, the return on investment is massively higher about learning about drugs than learning about the nuance of training. It just is, right? So you ask the question, so the only reason that you would be, you would turn away the conversation with drugs is that you're a staunch natural. And that's fair. That's a valid conversation, right? But that's not most people. Most people are not staunch naturals. Most people are open to the idea of moderate enhancement. What they're worried about is the deleterious consequences of that behavior. It's not the idea of, quote unquote, I'm not natty, but am I going to hurt myself? Yeah. So you understand these conversations become because you end up with this thing of going, so how big is the room of men who refuse to take drugs because they're staunch naturals? It's actually quite small, right? Yeah. And within that group of men, if you said to them, you do realize what we're bickering about here is 2 pounds of tissue, most of them go, fuck it.
Yeah, and so I think
it becomes this conversation.
We have to look at personal preference here the same way we do everything else, though, right? I'm not in the camp of yes, PEDs, no, it's personal choice, and I've heard every philosophical reason for one argument or the nether coaching this long. So, so I'm with you, but I do think that I would emphasize even more that I don't think we should look down on anybody that chooses a natural path, right? Just because that's their preference. Yeah.
I was a natural for 20 years. I competed as a natural for 20 years. My point being is, when I was 22 years old, I didn't have a fucking clue what I was doing. You know, I look back and I laugh at how stupid I was. Like the things I used to believe. But when I think about it, going, but none of my behaviors have changed. I used to believe things like the anabolic window. These are the things that we've learned, right? I'm not saying we haven't learned anything. The anabolic, I used to believe if I didn't ingest a protein shake, like on the way out the door at the gym, that training session was lost. I believe that, right? We know now that's folly, but the reality is, but I haven't changed the way I eat. You're in, like, it's trivial, it's interesting conversation that doesn't change behavior. And because it doesn't change behavior, it doesn't change the outcome. I'm bigger than I was bigger as most of these science-based naturals, and I didn't know anything because they just turned up and did shit. Right? And I'm not, and this is the whole point I'm making. It becomes this circular conversation. You're going, we just need to be honest, and we need to say, let me read a couple of things. Most of this industry, almost all of this industry, right, is a little bit fucking shady. Almost all of it. And it always has been. Bodybuilding is not a sport. It's a scam developed by Joe Weider to sell young men things they don't need. Right? Mr. Olympia is a scam, right? You saw his old ads, like pictures of Arnold. I put 2 inches on my biceps and 3 inches on my chest in 7 weeks. No, you didn't. That's a fucking lie. Right? We have been lying to young men for 50 years about the separation between average Joe and the genetically elite and selling them the source. We have been. Anyone that says that we haven't is part of the problem, right? And what I'm arguing is we had 50 years of bros dominating that dumb shit, right? Lying about drugs and doing this and da-da-da. And we're at this era of transparency where we talk openly about genetic response and open things, but the bros today want you to believe that if you buy their training program, there's some secret in their training program, in Kai Green's training program, that will turn you into Kai Green. They're still selling that shit, right? And anyone that thinks that the evidence-based community are transparent, you just have to ask, my original point is, if they were totally transparent, what they would do is follow my course. For 10 years, I held an open microphone. Any man that wants to step up and refute any claim I've made, you have that right. You can come and tell the world why I'm wrong. Any industry that doesn't have that policy, there's some sneaky shit going on. Right? And you could say, oh, they don't have to do that. You're right, they don't have to do that. But if they were totally transparent, like me, they would make the offer. So here's the thing. Eric Helms decided that he wanted to talk about PEDs on his platform, and specifically the safer use of PEDs. And rather than invite the man that created the safer use model and changed the way that we use PEDs globally, he turned to an academic, right, who was a member of my material, and interviewed him. Why did he do that? It's quite simple. It's called an academic circle jerk. He would rather interview a PhD about the subject than me. That's what an academic circle jerk is. The fact that Dr. Guillermo Escalante was interviewed is because he has 50 papers and a PhD. Eric was more interested in his credentials and the fact that I developed the models. Why interview a PhD about my models? Because you're part of an academic circle jerk.
So what is the evidence you have of your influence in the fact that all of these people are using your models, et cetera, and that there isn't just we'll say, mutual, like a lot of people coming to similar conclusions over time? This isn't an evolution across the sport, but you are like, what makes you think that you are the source and origin of all of this?
If you ask me to describe, I would say it comes down to describing key tenets of my models. How are my models different to what we did historically? Yeah. So the thing that I would lead with would be this. Historically, we view PED application in terms of the next cycle. What are we going to do for the next 6 to 20 weeks? Okay. We didn't look over the horizon. Nobody did. What I brought to the market was the world's first evidence-based lifetime exposure framework. We begin as a natural man. and have a strategic framework that goes through first exposure, basal use, competitor, elite competitor, retired bodybuilder, life events like praying practice model. The fact that we've gone from the immediate short-term window to a lifetime strategic plan, the difference in the conversation is so profound that anyone that hears the model instantly recognizes it as mine. It's not a little tweak.
Yeah.
And I would argue, even in training practices, the discussion should be a lifetime discussion up front. Who are you? Where you're going? What are your goals? Because what they are should change. But we still today program in the short term. Okay? The single biggest change that I brought to the PED world, there were hundreds and hundreds of line items that I corrected, but that's the single biggest change. Today, we view PED strategy through the next 30 years of use. It's such a profound change. No one can confuse these two things. And I welcome you asking the question, but no one's refuting that they're my models.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So my next question would be is how, like you say your models are evidence-based. What is the evidence?
So at the end of the day, what I would say is, again, if we said, tell me the 20 key tenets of the models, okay? The first thing I did was said, look, we should be only using drugs that are in lifetime human clinical use, okay? And we need to be using those drugs at dosages as close to the lifetime human clinical use as is practical that still allows us our goals. No more veterinary drugs, no more research chemicals, only drugs that we can speak to from body of data in the clinical literature. That's a first. All anabolic steroids accrete protein tissue at approximately the same rate. And that is via classic genomic sequencing, via the androgen receptor. There are two other pathways that are of interest. One is the estrogen receptor. We know the estrogen receptor is a hypertrophic pathway in its own right. Only testosterone metabolites into estrogen profile. These other drugs do not. So that's the only drug that opens that secondary pathway. And then there's a whole other class of discussion called non-genomic signaling. And that means that there's a whole bunch of receptors, like as you mentioned, in the human body, that these ligands are capable of binding to and causing a cascade of events, but they're not associated with protein accretion. Typically, they're associated with things like force production and aggression. Okay, so when you pick a drug, they all accrete protein tissue. It's what else they do off of the androgen receptor that determines which one we would use, when, why, and how much. This is all my education. Everyone speaks using this language today. I introduced an entire new generation of language, but people are so frightened of me. They're so afraid of me that they need to suppress my information. Why? Because I dare to challenge the academics. Where were all the academics and PhDs and doctors when we used to believe all this stuff? Looking at their shoes. Why am I explaining this? Why are they my models? I shouldn't even exist. And part of the reason that I'm suppressed is because the academics are embarrassed that I came along and explained it to them, and they feel humiliated by the fact that they didn't come up with it. So they need to suppress where it came from.
Okay. So the original question was, how is your system evidence-based? The first thing you told me was basically you're looking at only using human use drugs, right? And so you're applying a logical evidence that there's a safety net there because these are drugs that have been tested and for long-term use. And
the secondary level was not only human use drugs, but drugs in lifetime human clinical use. They're very different things, yeah? So there's a difference between a drug that's used acutely in disease state treatment and something that someone's given for life, yeah? And so once you start to just go, okay, we're only going to put drugs on the table that meet that criteria, there's a lot of evidence to discuss. Now, the evidence doesn't point to bodybuilders. It's just a safety discussion. And so this is the difference between what I'm saying. The bodybuilder performance enhancing drug model hasn't changed in 30 years. We've been using the same drug model for 30 years. I didn't come along and say I've got a bigger or better or faster one. I simply say, look, we can modulate this model in such a way that we get the same outcome as we got yesterday, the same, but we can do it at lower risk.
So what is the evidence for the same outcome?
Okay,
Just-
so what I would suggest is
or
that
efficacy.
okay, so it depends on what you define as evidence. What I would define as evidence is, are there individuals that are operating at the elite level that use my models?
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So just recently we had the winner of the Arnold Classic Physique. He uses my models. And I know that's N equals one. I appreciate that. But as you go around the world, you start to realize that, again, if you've looked at my page, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 IFB professionals. And this is a separation behind me, myself, and the evidence-based community. And that is, I'm offering proof cases of Olympians that use my models. Olympians.
Are
No.
they Olympians because they're using your models, or
No.
is the evidence that
because
we
my
can
models are
take
not
is that despite that with using your models, that's not holding them back from being Olympians?
But they would have been Olympians whether they use my models or not. All I'm offering is harm reduction. I'm not offering
Yeah,
bigger,
that's
better.
what I'm saying is that with your model, what you can say from this body of evidence is by using my model, which is a harm reduction model, they're
you're at
still
low
able
stress.
to be Olympian.
All I did was explain things like this. Listen, if all anabolic steroids accrete protein tissue at the same rate, and they do, right? The drugs that you select, right, should be based on what's the most benign choice, not some made up fantasy about trenbolone being more potent. It's not more anabolic. So the whole thing wedges together. You go, I haven't changed the model. I've just taken things out that lower risk. And I also introduced things like, I don't know whether you heard about the uptake of a drug called telmisartan, the combination angiotensin receptor blocker and PPR agonist. It's become like the de facto use in the bodybuilding world. And the reason we're doing that is that our practices elevate the effector molecules of the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, which is basically the molecules that are responsible for things like left ventricular hypertrophy and elevated hematocrit levels. So by introducing an ARB as a prophylactic, we've basically managed to offset many of the ills that plague this tribe, that are known ills, that they're not. We've known for 30 years what the ills are that plague us, but people historically walked around and just pointed the ills out and shook their head. No one offered a solution. How do we fix the problem? So my models, I mean, most people that have seen telmisartan, they go, no, I understand what an angiotensin receptor blocker does, right? And I understand why we're applying it, because you're elevating the effector molecules, angiotensin 2 and aldosterone, by the application of this class of drug. So these two balance each other out. And there's an abundance of evidence about the reasons you would use an ARB in the enhanced individual list. But we have to talk about 100 studies. This is the point I was making about what does the body of evidence say. You can't pull out a study, because there is no study on bodybuilders that shows clinical effect. It's inferred from 100 studies. Yeah? And this is why I claim right to them. If there was a study buried in the literature somewhere that explained all this, what did I invent? I just happened to drag out a study. Yeah. But it's the fact that I assembled these models off of thousands of studies and thousands of man hours down the rabbit hole that makes them mine. Again, the most important takeaway though here is the reason it's evidence-based is because of this. I believe you are only evidence-based if you allow peer review. If I didn't allow people to question me, if I didn't have an open microphone, I don't have the right to call myself evidence-based. It's part of the requirement. You can say that's not true, right? You can say they don't have to. We could disagree. I believe if you don't offer an open microphone, you are not evidence-based. Don't need to agree with me. That is my opinion.
So I just want to close here with some of my thoughts, and then, like I said, we can pick up and have another conversation down the road sometime if you want to do this again.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the censorship thing and having a voice, etc., right? I think we all have access to these platforms. I think it is generally good practice that if you're making any claims, that you need to be open to having discussion. Now, it is a tough thing when you're like, well, who gets invited to those discussions, right? So I don't have millions of followers, but I have enough followers to know that, look, you can't just give anybody with a voice your time. That's just the reality of it, or you're not going to get anything done. Like in a way, social media, the fact that it's giving everybody a voice also creates a lot of problems at the same time, right? Because they're
100%.
just sometimes it's just the same things being said over and over in time, and sometimes it's look like this, like it's not worth me having this conversation. So, my advice to you would be to create the pressure for those conversations to happen in a different way than you're currently doing it. So I had you on here to chat or whatever, but I'm an anomaly. I don't care. Like this could have went horribly awful, etc. I'm just curious, right? And we've like our first reaction that we had was a negative reaction. Our second reaction that we had was a negative reaction, and here you are. And then the most recent one here, you're upset that I require people to follow me to comment on my stuff. And you posted a thing like, "Oh, this is bullshit," or whatever, like you were being censored or something, which I found funny because I had actually like in your DMs, you'd saw that I had invited you to be on the podcast already. The reason that like it was probably like somewhere between 50, 70,000 followers, that all of a sudden, like I'd make a post and there would be like crypto screen. It became a moderation nightmare to deal with bots and stuff like that. And the easiest solution was like, oh, if they have to follow me, all of those things go away. And it also just is okay. Now there's a small barrier of entry to the conversation,
Sure.
which gets me to my point in that I believe in discourse, but I also believe in there being a reasonable barrier to the conversation.
Just going to reference the frame here because all of these things have a point. You have to understand, when I came out the gate, today I am hyper aggressive. You can only describe it as hyper aggressive, but I want to explain why because some people can follow me. When I came out the gate 10 years ago, I had a very different approach. I used to make free long form podcast content, not dissimilar to this, with academics. I had 20 odd academics that we discuss things with. Yep. The reality is that, but no one was interested. Like just people just like, I used to have some of the most profound conversations about the harm reduction elements of performance enhancing use that have ever taken place in bodybuilding. Nobody was interested. Even this content said 3 hours is that there'll be 15 people that stuck through this long. It's just the reality of it. Yeah. And so the point I'm making is that I started out one way, and as I started making content, one of the things that I started to understand was the moment that I started to make short form aggressive content, it became very polarizing. And the consequence of polarization is this: my income took off. It literally just woof. So I have been leaning harder and harder into that persona over the last couple of years. Why? Because it works, right? No one is interested in listening to long form guys, especially like a talking head. The more drama, the more controversy, the more money I make. I make no bones about that. When I call this guy and this guy out, when I call out the scientists, you see what happens here. So when I call out the scientists, I offend 100 people and 100 people cheer. You get that, right? Yeah. And that's what we talk about marketing. Ridiculous that I need to do that, but it's the reality of the world we live in. We are so pressured for attention. When I created calm, rational, logical, long form evidence, nobody watched. And the moment I became a firebrand, my sales took off. I'm unashamedly, I'm very transparent. I have this website. It's $100 to learn about PEDs. It's also extends where you can keep paying $100 a month, and we migrate into more and more content. We do female use and then hair loss, and we keep going. And the point I'm making is I have about 1,000 members, and it's $97 a month. Why do I behave this way? Because it works. It creates money. And this is the point I'm making about people is people need to understand this. If you know everything and you speak quietly and you don't upset people and you don't rustle the boat, no one gives a fuck, right? The moment I started calling people out, and here's the thing, I don't call them out unfairly because I legitimately want to debate with them. If they want to block me, fuck them. I'm gonna milk that for all it's worth. People don't understand that. It's not a flawed personality. This is about business. You have two choices. I call you out and you come to the microphone, or I call you out and you fuck off. Either way, I win. Because you have to understand there are bros out there that hate the scientists. And the fact that I'm kicking them in the nuts for the first time, no one's ever done it, I'm like their hero. Now, I'm not stupidly saying that's the entire marketplace, but that's not what branding is about. Branding is about cutting out a little piece of territory in the market for people that have a personal preference to listen to your style. And I'm telling you, there's 1,000 people that fucking love what I do. They cheer me on. Yeah, get them, fucking kick them in the balls, right? And this is what people just need to understand is, make most sense. This is not my preferred discourse process. It is what I'm forced into because we live in a world where knowledge isn't enough. It's all about marketing. It's all about attention. It's all about drama. And I'm telling you, there are 1 million PED users, and 1,000 at $100 a month is enough. It's enough.
So
that's a decent business. Yeah.
my comeback to that would be, one, I don't know that I would consider the couple times that you came at me fair, but I would say that potentially you're self-selecting to not be able to have these conversations that you want, and you're self-selecting for the behaviors that you're complaining about from the other side. So if you want to look at the scientific community and be like, yeah, these guys, they don't give any respect to the bros and what they're doing, et cetera, whatnot. Like, I have sat in this chair with people from both sides, pro bro, pro science, et cetera, whatever, and I have played the opposition role in both scenarios. And my, general consensus is there's just a lack of respect on both sides, like whether that's genuine or just the way that it's being portrayed on social media.
100%.
You can't be like, okay, well, this is the approach that I'm going to take for my business, but then complain about the reaction that has to
We'll call it
the cultural reaction to
we
that.
can call it a total and absolute lack of mutual respect. I have no respect for Dr. Mike Israetel. None. His most popular videos are call-out videos. Go to his video content and click on most popular. Calling out Dr. Oz, calling out this guy, calling out this state. He makes a living by calling people out. Right?
But isn't that what you just described to me, though?
No, I understand, but this is the point I'm making is like, this is the game. I just want people to understand what the game is. If you have someone who doesn't respond to polite requests for debating, just ignores you or blocks you or whatever like that, you have two choices. You let them scurry off and continue with their appalling behavior, or you roll up your sleeves and you play the game. Make no mistake, I don't expect respect. I destroy them. They're just a bunch of dickheads. It's not about mutual respect. It's about, I have no respect for them. And this is what I'm saying is, what you have to understand is this movement, this groundswell of lack of respect for the scientists is going to get bigger and bigger because I have influence with the coaches. Those 1,000 people that follow me are not Joe Schmo. I have no influence over Joe Schmo. That's the domain of Mike Israetel and Jeff Nippard and Derek Morplace, the guys with the big audience. They're Joe Schmo. The very small number of people that follow me are elite professionals and coaches. And they're starting to understand what a bunch of wankers these guys are. And that groundswell is going to get stronger. There is no fixing this. There is no mending the bridge. This is war. And I'm going to do my best to damage their reputations because they deserve it. And then what I'm going to do is get them to understand, when I don't make my living from this, I'm not a PhD in exercise science. I run 6 businesses. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a businessman. So when I completely damage their reputations because of the scumbags they are, and I step into my other businesses, I'll laugh and wave, but they deserved it because they didn't want to sit down and have respectful conversations. They chose to, play that card. If you say to me, yeah, but you're not being respectful, this is war. This is literally war.
So you're admitting to being openly hostile. So
100%. The same way they are to me.
So what expectation can you have in terms of discourse? Are you just sealing the deal now that, hey, I'm not going to have conversations with any of these people, and they
could come up and talk to me. If Eric Helms approaches me tomorrow and says, look, I'm really sorry, I heard what you said, fair call, you deserve a seat at the table, and I didn't give you any fucking respect, right? I apologize. Right, let's move forward. I have no problem with that. I'm not saying it's a closed door, but what I'm saying is, like, the fact that he refuses to acknowledge me and blocks me and starts making super use content with some other academic, he needs to come and apologize, and then we can move forward. Do you understand how that works?
And you don't think that door swings both ways?
What do I need to apologize for?
Well, what did that you so you're saying that he needs to apologize because he had somebody else on his
Talking about
podcast
my
instead.
materials on his podcast, my materials, safer use is my brand. It's imagine if someone else got like a student of yours to talk about N1 on their podcast. Wouldn't that piss you off if they said all of your materials,
Oh, it
but
happens
they
every
left your
week.
brand? But if they left your brand off, doesn't that annoy you?
Yeah, it still happens like every week, dude. Like,
So
but
here's the thing: you have
with
a choice,
social
right?
media on TikTok, it is literally a business model to copy our stuff.
Correct.
That is a business model on TikTok.
So you understand that, and this is the personal choice element of this. All of these conversations have got absolutely nothing to do with science. None of this is to do with science. This is about social media and branding and marketing and business and money and strategy. That's what all of this is about. And if you said to me, look, there are half a dozen paths that you could go down, and Victor, you've chosen to go down the most aggressive path that exists. I agree with you. Could I have taken a more moderate path? The reality is that over the years, my voice has gone from quietly spoken and polite and respectful, and I'm still respectful to you. I haven't been offensive to you, I'm sure you'd agree, to louder and louder, to the point where by now people are starting to pay attention. People are starting to listen to what I'm saying. This is not about science. None of this is about evidence. None of this is about science. This is a marketing, branding exercise between the guys that want to sell the secret sauce and me trying to say there's no secret sauce.
We'll put it this way. Your business approach, that's yours. I do think there is a little hypocrisy in that approach and the expectations that you also have in terms of what respect or communication, et cetera, that you do receive from other people. That's my honest feedback. The last post that you did where you like throw up my thing and be like, in attacking me for having that comment setting or whatever. Yeah, I did find that disrespectful because that to me, like I had already sent you an inquiry to talk. So to even imply that I have tried to censor
let's address that,
anybody,
because that's the
to
second
me,
time we
that
said
is
that.
disrespectful.
Let me second that, because there's, just so we're super clear. So you and I had a historical discussion a while ago, and we took a private call, like a Zoom call. Do you remember the private call?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That was before the squat bar. That's what I was referring to.
That call was about the squat bar call. But anyway, the point I'm making is, but since then, if you want, I can show you the screenshot. You haven't invited me on your show, right? Yeah, I know you said you did, but I don't have record of it. Let's just say that.
Oh, I have a screenshot of it.
Okay, cool.
It's in your DMs. Now, obviously, you lost your
I lost
Instagram
my thing.
account.
So, and then what I say is, but even through the whole process, what I'm saying is, if you wanted to say, look, this is more complicated because it's a little bit like this way and that way, I have no problem with it. I honestly don't, right? Conflict resolution is about always accepting that both parties have a role to play. You understand? That's just how it is. Okay. People want to paint it out, oh, we're angels and Victor's the bad guy. That's all I'm simply saying is, if people want to say, look, hyper aggressive, you do this, I don't have anything to say, because you're right. It's a tactic that works, but I find myself forced into the corner through first happens this, and then happens this, and then that happens this. I'll give you a classic example. You've known who I am for at least 2 years, all right? We haven't had any discussion at all. Don't you find that mutually a little strange? Mutually.
I mean, considering how our first interaction was, not really, because that didn't leave me with the desire for more interactions, right?
Nor me, Kassem, nor me. You came across on that call as incredibly disrespectful. So we share that outcome today. You've been very pleasant. You've been lovely today. But the first call that we took, I'm sure you walked away from that thinking, what a dick. And I can assure you, I walked away from that thinking, what a dick. Do you understand what I mean? So yeah, this is what I'm saying, is conflict doesn't ever get resolved by one party saying you're responsible. If you want to say the first call that we took was mutually uncomfortable, we both got a negative feeling, I agree with you. I have no problem with that whatsoever. So this has been a lovely conversation. I speak passionately, but I have made no attacks on you whatsoever. I speak when I speak about the scientist. I have a world of respect for you. The fact that you're even allowing this conversation to take place, like, kudos to you. You're like the one stand-up guy in this tribe so far. You're in. Now, the whole point I'm making is, if you, let's just close this off because we've been there a long time. If you go back, anyone that goes back to this conversation, what the hell are we disagreeing about? Almost nothing. This is all churn because people are trying to get their nose in the trough. If you step back and remove money and remove popularity and branding from the whole exercise, we're saying the same things. We're not disagreeing on hardly anything. So this is the point I'm making, is people need to understand these dialogues have got nothing to do with science. They're 100% about branding and positioning and followers and attention and content and money. Because I haven't heard you say anything that I disagree with, not one thing. Even the point about my approach to business, you're right. We don't disagree on anything. This is entirely, to sum up the whole call, this is a fabulous call because it showed here's a robust, at times excitable conversation. I'm very passionate about this. You've been a very gracious host. I can't recall us disagreeing on a single thing.
Yeah. I mean,
so what
the fact that we agree so much, and I do think that you would share that sentiment with some of the other people that you have, that you have mentioned or whatever.
Eric Helms is not going to disagree with me about anything.
So, but given what I felt is that this was a call of, hey, I want to be part of this conversation, right? If that is truly a desire, my suggestion would be find a way that doesn't hurt your business, but you can be proactive in pushing that. This is completely up to you, right? How bad do you want to have these conversations versus you just want to go to war in your own little corner and with your niche? Cool. Then you can do that. But if you want to move out, me being on much further of the more open spectrum than I know a lot of the other people that you want to talk to, I just don't foresee that conversation happening otherwise. It's not going to happen.
But see, that's what I'm saying. It's not going to happen. So we're totally transparent for people following this. I am an evidence-based educator that does not believe evidence-based education could work in this niche. I don't believe it could work. Why? Because 10,000 coaches are never going to get to the point where they all unanimously agree, okay, you're right, Victor, we're all doing the same fucking thing. We're trying to churn this out as a brand. That's never going to happen. My end goal will never materialize, right? So I've made a conscious decision to say, look, I've taught the world about PEDs. I've done a great job. I'm very proud of what I have given this tribe, and I'm moving forward. Why? Because I recognize that throwing yourself against the wall when it's never going to change is folly. I just appreciate these opportunities because I will, and I have several other academics that will be making podcasts. We're just going to put them out there so people can see how poisonous this is, this whole environment. If people want to say I add to the toxin, I don't have any problem with that. This is war. This is what happens when wars start. But the reality is I am an evidence-based educator. When I speak about PEDs and that, you're not going, you're full of shit. You seem to be, that's very interesting. I have delivered a great deal. But this is never going to happen because we're not doctors. We're not dentists. We're guys that have no barrier to entry. And all that's going to happen is people are going to steal your content and pass it off as their own for the end of days. And people are going to steal my shit and pass it off as their own for the end of days. There is no solution. All there is to basically make it clear what the point was and move forward to the next project. That's all there is left.
Is the solution not you have your 1,000 people? We've repeatedly said this is all business and marketing. Yeah. Is the solution to everybody copying your shit, not just marketing your shit better to compete with the people that are copying your shit?
Here's the challenge, and nobody needs to agree with me on this. I would argue that innovation and marketing are very different disciplines.
They are.
Yeah. And very rarely do you find someone who's a great innovator that is also a great marketer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And this is
a
the
lot
whole
of time
point.
that's where a partner or a team,
No, I
know,
understand, but this
comes
is
into
where
play.
what I would say to you is things like, so I tried to partner with Joe Jeffrey because I recognized his skill as an internet marketer. I tried to partner with Derek More Plates, More Dates. I tried to partner with John Jewett. I tried to partner with people that are identified as having audiences, right? But the reality is, John Jewett has a $3,000 educational course called J3 University. He's never going to say, I learned everything I learned from Victor and you can pay $97. Why might he not want to say, you can learn from me at 3,000 or Victor from 97? You understand the problem, right? Nobody is going to say I'm the source, because all that's going to happen is the moment you say Victor's the source, all of your followers come over and listen to me. It's not possible that it doesn't work.
Well, it sounds like I need to take your course and John Jewett's course side by side to see
by all means.
what a $2,900 difference is or isn't.
Let me just run through that. I will most graciously send you John's absolute acknowledgement that he learned the black models from me. He doesn't dispute that.
Well, I'm not saying one way or another. I don't know. I'm just like,
You-
out of
you understand, like,
curiosity, I will
why-
probably look at both products side by side.
You should do, but you understand the point I'm making, though, is why did Derek More Plates, More Dates not ask me to come on the show and talk about PEDs? You understand why? Because that would make me look like the authority that taught Derek, and then all of his followers would follow me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that fear, when in reality, like in this day and age, people would still buy their stuff because they're fans of them.
Yeah.
Even if they're
Correct.
like, oh yeah, this Victor guy's smart, but I actually like listening to Derek, or I actually like
Because
listening
it's
to
entertaining.
John,
Because it's
or
entertaining.
whatever, right? And also they're just putting out such a substantial volume of content
Correct.
too, right? Yeah.
So to close, I appreciate this opportunity. It was a fabulous call because all of the points I came to make were made. Like, we don't have any disagreement here. This is all smoke and mirrors about business and strategy and marketing and positioning. And this guy's insecurity, he can't tell this and can't do that. Everything that I came to communicate was communicated. It's brilliant. Like, I didn't expect we would ever have conflict, because the things I'm saying are so rational and reasonable and balanced and evidence-based. But again, like, one final thing, the idea that this community, not medicine or some other community, this community with such a low barrier to entry is ever going to get to the point where we have an acceptance that Hanny Rombard doesn't know anything special, that his success comes from picking the right athletes to work with and supporting and nurturing them, that there is no Hanny secret. We're years away from people going, that's true. We're years away from that point. You know, that's what I would argue is, on the way out the door, let me just take a little swipe. On the way out the door, what I would say is this: the science-based community, if you're honest about it, have done a very good job of building a very small and very robust niche around themselves. They have done a very poor job of actually reaching the masses and explaining to the masses what's really going on. Okay.
Yeah.
Most people that go into the gym still believe that Hanny has the secret sauce. After all this time, they still believe that. Yeah. And what I would add is, for all of my firebrand approach, for all of my huffing and puffing and blowing, I have made a pretty significant dent in the fact that the bros don't have the secret sauce. The scientists don't have the secret sauce. There is no secret sauce. Knowledge doesn't correlate to outcomes in bodybuilding. If you think about impact and who's which, you can argue the merits of the vehicle that you use to get that way, but my legacy will ultimately be having brought harm reduction to PED education, and to some extent, teaching coaches that, you know what, there's nothing more to learn. What you need to do is spend time building a brand, recognize the sewer that we live in, the toxic sewer that we all live in called coaching, and just accept the fact that you can't change it. You can't change that. Just accept it and build your brand and build a successful business and let it go. You cannot change these people. Thank you for your time, buddy. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give us a like, subscribe, and leave us a review, and we will see you on the next episode of the N1 Experience.